Welcome back to DemystifySci. I'm Shiloh.
I'm Anastasia.
This is the podcast where we search for the theories that are going to change the world. And sometimes that means going back into history to see what ideas may have been lost that could be quite useful in our modern age. This happens more often than not in our study of the great mysteries of physics that still remain today. But today, we're looking at something a little bit different. We're looking at the ancient theory of physiognomy. And physiognomy has gotten a bad name in recent times because we live in a world that wants to believe that, well, you can be anything that you want to be. But physiognomy supposes that your face actually reflects who you are, and therefore you can learn something about your potential through your physical characteristics. Physiognomy doesn't seem to be aimed so much at putting people in their boxes so much as helping them understand themselves, which is quite interesting. And actually, once we have this realization that understanding yourself is the platform from which you can actually be powerful in becoming the best version of yourself, it seems like a pretty cool practice if it passes the smell test. And honestly, there's a lot of really interesting and compelling features that we learned about in this conversation with our guest, Taylor Northcutt, from the YouTube channel Prosopa.
Northcutt's practice is historically informed. So he's basically gone through the physiognomy literature from India, China, the Arabic world, from the ancient Greek world, and has learned how to read features, which seems kind of weird because, like Shiloh was saying earlier, we live in a society right now where our main adage is like, don't judge a book by its cover. But Northcutt's point is that there's actually these sorts of strange interplays that show up superficially that reflect deeper tendencies. And if we can understand those deeper tendencies about ourselves and about other people, then we can actually figure out where it is that we fit into the world, why the world might not really work for us the way that we want it to work, and learn to exist in a way that's more harmonious and effective.
And I think it helps us understand our times a little bit in terms of why we inherited this wisdom that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, because that turns out to be a really fairly modern idiom. And it seems like for most of history, the idea was, hey, kids, you should definitely learn how to judge a book by its cover because that might be the only chance you get sometimes. So what happened? And how did we end up in this world where our teachers were pointing us in a different direction? And did that work out?
And it's actually pretty funny because at some point, about halfway through the conversation, Taylor reads our faces. And there's a bunch of little things that he reads accurately that I'm not totally sure how he would know, like about how much water you drink or about certain tendencies towards popular idea. Well, I guess that one's a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah, you guys can make up your own mind. It was really fun, though. And I think there's something to it. So check it out. Tell us what you think in the comments. If you want to hang out and tell us what you think in person, consider joining our Patreon and coming to our Sunday salon where we get together and talk every week for an hour on Sunday mornings. You can find out more about that at patreon.com/demystifysci, which, by the way, is the only way that this show is paid for. We are very much hell-bent on not selling things that we didn't make ourselves. And that might seem insane to you, but it's working. And honestly, through the power of large numbers, you can give as little as 75 cents a week and appreciably increase the power of this show, make it possible for us to do more of these interviews in person, live, put on more live events, and really start to nucleate something in the world as opposed to just being a podcast out there talking one way, which means everything to us. You could also support the podcast by picking up a copy of our new vinyl record. This is by our band, Secretary of Nature. The record is called Everything Is So Good Here, and it is. And it is a beautiful record. It is the kind of music that you really want to enjoy in this format. It is long, mythical song structures that weave across an entire side. And I think this is the way to experience this music. So if you have a record player, pick up a copy of this. The link is down below. If you don't have a record player, maybe buy a record player so that you can listen to this. I really think it'll be worth your while.
We've also got a couple of different sweater designs that we have for sale in the YouTube shelf. We designed them ourselves. We'll have a couple more designs in the coming weeks. And there is one other way that you can get involved in the project, and that is paradigm drift. So paradigm drift is our opportunity to open up the floor to the theorists of the world. There's plenty of theories out there that might not be ready for a 3-hour podcast, but we wanted to be able to have a way for those theories to get out into the world, and that is what paradigm drift is. And so if you sign up to present, you sign up for a chance to get pulled from the hat. If you get pulled, you get 60 seconds to present your theory, and then we do an interview with you. We've usually got a panelist with us. Shiloh does all of the music live from inside of his spaceship, and we have a pretty lively chat where people kind of, go back and forth and workshop the theories and react to what makes sense and what doesn't, and it's a pretty sweet community. So the next taping is on October 17th at 7 p.m. The link is in the description. Sign up to become one of our paradigm drifters.
Yeah, come on out. Exercise your mind. That's what it's all about. Let's compare ideas and figure out the best way to talk about the ones that actually are really promising.
And for now, enjoy the conversation with Taylor Northcutt of the Prosopa YouTube channel about the ancient art of physiognomy.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The DemystifySci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
Physiognomy is very ancient and is found in pretty much every major culture. The most prominent schools of physiognomy are found in the most prominent scientifically advanced ancient cultures. So Chinese got it, Indians got it, Arabs had it, Greeks had it. So if you hear about it in a Western context, it of course comes from the Greek school, and that's the most famous one, where when you hear about the 4 humors, the 4 temperaments, that was always tied into physiognomy. They align in a lot of areas, all these different schools of physiognomy around the world. They seem to converge on agreeing on about a lot of things. It seems like they mostly stem out of collections of observations that were then systematized into a proper science, sort of the way any field of science works, whether it's biology or chemistry. You make observations, test them, gather them up, and then figure out the underlying principles. There were, of course, different interpretations. So you go to China, they interpret it with their 5-element system. So you talk about the face shapes, they say, oh, there's a wood face and a metal face and a water face. But then you go to the West, you go to the Greeks, and they're talking about the 4 temperaments. They're talking about blood and yellow and black bile and phlegm and all that stuff. Arabs and Indians, kind of a mix. They get influences from both sides, but they have sort of their own focus. A big focus was, of course, the personality aspect. That's always kind of been the primary focus of discerning someone's character. A big one was trustworthy versus untrustworthy, because that's obviously very practical. There is an anecdote, and I'm not sure of its validity, but apparently, supposedly, Abraham Lincoln used physiognomy in a job interview once when he was president. Some guy came and applied, and he had this great resume and was this great talker. And after the interview, Abe Lincoln turned to his associates, his assistants, and he said, "Don't let that guy back in here." They're like, "Why? Why? He's great for the job." He's like, "I don't trust his face. He is a totally like criminal look in the eye or something." Turns out the guy was a serial fraudster. And that's something I've heard. You'd have to ask a presidential historian about the validity of that. But all that to say, it's got a long.
If I might say, that's kind of at the heart of what we're going to be discussing today, right? It's this sort of impression that you get from people and how reliable that really is. And this is the attempt to, in some sense, find a systematic, rational basis for those perceptions. I think people, especially people in the rational scientific communities in general, tend to shy away from things like intuitions, right? Because, intuitions can be wrong. And it's like, I remember when I was like in 8th grade, I had this history teacher, and she kind of played this trick on all of us where she had this, I think it was like a poster with a bunch of pictures on it. And she was like, "I want you guys to go around the room to these posters and write down a story for who you think this person is." And it was kind of a trick, right? Because like the really criminal looking people turned out to be like Harvard scholars or something. And the whole point was like this gotcha experiment, and like, oh, well, people aren't who you think they are. And that stuck with me for years and years, because the reality that's actually played out in my life after that is that people really do kind of tend to be the way that they look on first sight. Like I found I had to really like disavow myself of that lesson that was impressed on me in 8th grade, because it just doesn't seem to have played out in my reality. And so this project that you're working on seems to be an attempt to actually find some systematic patterns in that and really make sense of it in a way that we could perhaps find a way to rely on our intuitions a bit better. I don't know. Is that a good way of putting it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think everyone should clean their minds of everything that was pushed into them in public school. I think it's a rotten place where it's an engine of social engineering. That's the point of it. That's why your teacher is doing these weird gotchas to try and make the kids doubt their own intuition and like this common knowledge sort of stuff.
I think she meant well, to be honest. Like, I think she was
they always mean well.
Yeah.
Most people mean well when they do stuff. Very few people actually genuinely mean ill. It's generally like the worst of the worst.
I mean, we've had the adage of don't judge a book by its cover for probably, I looked this up actually on Google Ngram, and so it's about 100 years old. And I feel like that's significant because it's weird for that to only be 100 years old, because presumably if that was old wisdom, you would expect that that would be constantly percolating through history and you'd be able to find some form of it. But it seems like it's a relatively new sentiment where it's...
The opposite is the old wisdom. Don't judge it by its cover. It's a, not to put too political spin on it, I mean this, it's small L liberal in here. It's a bleeding heart liberal kind of thing. This early 20th century, you go to the early 1900s, and it's very utopian, very small p progressive, where there's this idea that, well, modernity's here, we can engineer a new society, and blank slateism is in heavy. There's a weird conflict within progressivism at the time. You have more of the people who are more into biology and physiognomy, who then go off on the deep end into eugenics. Eugenics was a progressive thing at the time, originally. And then you have the other side, who are much more of the egalitarian utopians. And both are kind of nutty in their own rights. But the latter faction ended up winning out. And so there was this very, like I said, blank slatist utopian idea that kind of took hold in Western society, and especially in academia, where there was this dogma rooted mostly in emotion and in sentiment from everything that I've learned from it. Because, I mean, you just go over time and the science increasingly diverges from it. We discover genetic inheritance, we discover Darwinian evolution, we discover DNA, and blank slatism is getting hit harder and harder. But yet society and even the ideology and dogma within academia, it's going more and more blank slatist. It's like, well, now sex and gender is a blank slate. That's arbitrary. Sexuality, parents, the family structure. So it seems like at some point there was a divorce between the two. And I think that's been causing a lot of problems ever since. So there's a big complex history, a big web of different factors that have resulted in physiognomy being sort of exiled from polite society, from academia. But ultimately, I think a lot of it is just rooted in sentiment, a particular Western sentiment, and especially an American sentiment, because Americans don't want to judge anyone, because the whole idea is that you can be anything. We all heard in public school, you can be an astronaut if you want. You could be the president. You can be anything you want, which is the big, beautiful lie of America, the BBL, if you will, of America, where it's because it's the land of opportunity, and it makes you feel good to believe that, to think I can be anything I want. And it's actually a really good thing for your country to have people believe that, because if you're like the Soviet Union, and you're telling everyone you're going to be a factory worker, and that's awesome because workers are great, and you're going to be a factory worker for the rest of your life, enjoy, then they're going to put in the bare minimum, right? Okay, I'm a factory worker, that's fine. But if you can convince your factory workers, your peasants, if you work hard enough, if you work harder than everyone else, you might be as rich as me someday.
You can own the factory.
Keep working.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can own the factory. Yeah. Then that keeps them on the hamster wheel, willingly, happily, and very diligently, because they They're going to put in that extra work to think I can get ahead. This is hustle culture and all that. But to
It's so
say,
hard though, because it is kind of true. Like it is remotely possible that you could have a brilliant idea for a product, and like if you were ingenious enough to sculpt your future, I just feel like in a lot of other societies in the world today and in the past, you really are locked into your caste or
well, that's why it works. That's why it persists in America, because it is true to a degree. It gets exaggerated as the problem, right? So you have this original idea of land of opportunity, proposition nation, this great stuff that works, and it builds America up into this great place. Because pushing people, it's not just a trick to keep you in the rat race. It does, like, people can and do get ahead with it. Probably not most people, but a lot of them. But then even the people who don't necessarily get to be billionaires, they probably get better off than they would be if they were in a very conformist society like China, or
yeah, like
most
with a
places
shitload
in
of work and lessons learned the
996.
hardest
Yeah, just
way, and just
overworked.
and like it is true, you can become president if you're born in this country, but it's also true that like it will help out if your dad's the director of the CIA and was also a president, and like there's a
Mhm.
lot of backstory to that in terms of the almost like the Bayesian priors that go into the probability of you becoming a president. Like there's much more
Yeah.
to it than just being a normal person born in the United States.
You could always become a high-level lackey even if you don't become president, you know?
If that's what you're aiming for, but they're not like, hey kids, you can become a high level bureaucrat if you want. They're like, you can become president. It's like,
Yeah, true. So how does
And
physiognomy tie into this? Like, doesn't it technically so my intuition is that if you have this inherent sorting that you can make of people, it leads them to be sorted into this pre-existing caste system of, oh,
mm,
this is the cholerics are the mine workers, I'd actually like I don't know the categories of physiognomy, but it just seems like something that you just kind of automatically just sift people into these categories, and then you structure society around, where they belong.
yeah. Well, I would say that's already the case. Physiognomy is just another way of telling that, because these inborn characteristics are already there and they're strongly there. Obviously, you guys know about all the twin studies, all the crazy things they found about that. Two twins separated at birth. And they find them 40 years later, and they're both married to like identical looking women with the same first name. Crazy little things like that. And so I would say it's already the case, and yet it's also already the case that that's not the whole picture. I like to say that genetics isn't nothing, but it isn't everything either, where it's sort of like the hand that you're dealt. Americans love gambling, so our culture has a lot of poker analogies in it. And people always say, oh, the hand you were dealt. It's about how you play it, how you use it. And that's kind of just general ancient wisdom as well. You've got the parable of the talents. The servants are distributed different amounts of talents, and then what matters is what you do with it. So you can almost think of it like a sort of kind of like a soft destiny, soft predestination, where sort of like a video game, right? Even in an open world video game, you have a limited amount of options. The characters, what you can do in the game, that's already set. And then sometimes literally you pick from a menu of like 4 dialogue options. So you have choice, but you have limited choice. Like for me, based on my genetics, I have certain, like I can't play in the NBA. That's not an option for me. I probably couldn't play in much of any sports leagues. Maybe cricket. I don't know how like cricket
I
players
mean,
are built.
if you could make jump shots from the other end of the court, like if you had some insane talent for throwing objects, you might be able to play in the NBA. Like it would have to be at the absolute tail end of the distribution. Like it's not
Yeah,
impossible. That's what's so frustratingly difficult about talking about these things, is like you're not like all of these things are not cold hard rules, but it would also be completely misleading for somebody to just say like, hey, maybe you should aim for the NBA. Like that seems like that would work out for you. Like that would be insane
yeah.
too, right?
Human beings are so complex and mind-bogglingly complex and multi-layered. multifaceted. This is why I couch everything. It's soft. Everything's soft. It's fuzzy around the edges. It's like in a Photoshop or a similar program. You have a hard brush and a little airbrush tool. It's fuzzy on the edges. Where there's stuff where you have, like I said, edge cases where it's like a short guy who's a great thrower. Well, that's a marginal case. But in science, you have bell curves and statistical distributions and all this stuff in order to be able to categorize that and be like, these are outliers, but here's the mean. So I think that I see physiognomy not as and maybe I shouldn't be saying this because maybe this is like downplaying my own importance, but I don't see it as a be all end all. I don't see it as this is the key to it. I think it's a tool in a toolbox, one of many, in terms of both a person assessing other people as well as just human biology as a whole, where this is one aspect of many, where this is one aspect of assessing genetics, and genetics are a big part, but it's not even the whole picture. A big thing that a lot of the physiognomists that I've studied emphasize is moral choice, is that it's actually difficult, if not impossible, to tell actual morality from face. You can tell stuff that correlates with, say, criminality in some cases, like impulsivity, aggression, stuff like that, selfishness, even. But you can't tell morality, and a lot of that comes from upbringing and personal choice. It's a bit tangential, but I think it's an illustrative example. There's a study, I read it PDF form. It was excerpted from a U.S. military magazine from the 90s. It was talking about a phenomenon known as natural born killers, where they did studies within the Army, Marines. I think this was coming off the Gulf War. And they found out, hey, all of our troops are firing. 80% of our kills are done by only let's say 20, let's call it 80-20, because most things in statistics seem to be 80-20. 80% of our kills are being done by 20% of our troops, maybe even less. And they did studies on them, and they found they shared a lot of traits. In Myers-Briggs terms, a lot of them were ESTPs. They had a caustic sense of humor. They were usually middle children, second or third sons, not firstborn. Very aggressive. And the important part here is that they were from higher socioeconomic status, middle to upper class. And when they were going into this, they're like, why is this? They said, well, the other things correlate with being natural killers. Like these guys, they kill and they don't feel bad about it. The other troops, when they happen to accidentally, hit someone, they get real torn up about it. This guy, the people in this category, whether they're Marines, Army, Navy SEALs, they'll take out 5 enemy troops and not break a sweat. And what they determined is that the reason why all of our natural born killers are from an upper level socioeconomic background is because all the ones who weren't are in jail now. So they did conclude that there's people who are born with this predisposition in all social classes. The problem is if you're born with this and you end up lower class, you are somewhat screwed because your options are much more limited, and it's much harder to find a positive outlet for this or have good social support structures that let you suppress these impulses or divert them into something positive. So they end up in jail. They end up doing criminal actions. But if you're a privileged rich kid who's wired that way, then you get into the military. So there's an element of personal choice. Then there's an element of social determinism along with genetic determinism that you can actually, modify with social programs and outreach and stuff like that to a limited degree. And that's a whole different discussion that I'm not really equipped to sort of handle, but I know that that's an element there.
So, in terms of the way that physiognomy was practiced in ancient cultures, you said that there's great parallels between the different cultures in terms of what they would see in faces. They would kind of call them different things. How many categories of things does physiognomy get binned into? Like, how many different things are people observing in faces?
Yeah. So at the most fundamental level, for most of them, it's personality. The other big one, though, and was more common historically, less so now. Although there are some physiognomists on YouTube. I'm blanking on the names, but there are some guys who actually are retired MDs who do this, and then they look at it for signs of kidney, liver, spleen, different stuff potentially being able to be seen on the face as a way of trying to get ahead of it, right? Because you want to be able to identify, kidney dysfunction before someone sees red in the toilet. And same thing with any of the other organs. So there's a huge incentive for a doctor to be able to get ahead of that. So health was a really big one. This is, it's not directly related to physiognomy, but it comes from the same system of the four humors. Bloodletting, historically, that's where that comes from. That was a scientific theory from the Greeks carried through to George Washington. Poor guy, probably died that way. Although I have seen some stuff coming out being like saying, well, actually there are some benefits, it seems, to minor, like blood donation. Doctors still use leeches sometimes.
It's actually one of the only ways that you can get microplastics out of your body.
No way.
Yeah, because
Is that what was killing Washington?
Yeah, because if you remove the contaminated blood, you've removed all the stuff that's circulating, and then you've lowered the number of microplastics in the system. And when the new cells regenerate the blood supply, they regenerate it clean.
The Greeks were so ahead of us on everything. Dude, they knew about microplastics even. That's crazy. Probably all the microplastics from Atlantis they were getting in.
Mhm.
But so yeah, health is a big one, especially if you go to the Chinese, or especially the Indian stuff. That's what they'll look for a lot. There are these Chinese charts, and this then ties into acupuncture, because they'll have charts where they correlate different parts of the face and even the ear with different organs and stuff. But then the third element, so you have personality, which is the modern focus.
Can I just interject one thing before you get to the third element?
Go ahead.
We both have this really funny experience when we go to like a new doctor for the first time. You see like on their face that they're kind of unhealthy. It always freaks us out really bad. And I think that's maybe like the most practical application of this, other than criminality, that I have experience with, is like when some doctor's like giving me some advice or something and I'm like, you don't look very good. Or even some personality on the internet. Like we've had people come on this show and give health advice that look completely sick. And I'm just like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
Anyway.
these fad diet guys who look like Liver King went crazy.
I was just gonna say Liver King,
eating a bunch of raw meat. He was like, he was transmogrified into a beast. It's like Nebuchadnezzar.
All right, so the third element. Sorry, I just wanted
third
to
element. No worries. That love them. Tie it in with all your stuff. So personality, that's the modern focus. We like that because we're Westerners. We're Faustian. We love the individual and his personal story. This is why astrology as we know it, with the horoscopes and the personality thing, that was pretty much invented in the late 1800s by, blanking on the name again, I'm not a big astrology guy, but it was like one guy who did all this. That's also why you can read all these astrology books and they have stuff about Pluto and Neptune and Uranus, which no one knew about in ancient times because you needed a big advanced telescope to see them. This one guy invented all the meanings for that. And I'll be fair to the astrologers, because I have some friends. You meet some interesting folks here. I have friends who are into astrology. He maybe discovered it, but it all comes from one guy and the whole recasting of it as personality. Because before then, it was used for the same purpose as physiognomy, which was fortune telling, fate. That's the big third element there. You still have this a lot in Chinese face reading. All of the Asiatic stuff I found, the sort of wooey kind of stuff, especially in China, it's very wealth focused. Western stuff, it's very individual focused. Eastern stuff, it's very collective focused, wealth focused, very pragmatic. So all of the Chinese stuff, I've gotten into feng shui before, trying to get into interior design, and everything in that is about attracting wealth, attracting health. That's the main thing. And so you go to Chinese face reading, and they're always asking, what's the sign that you're going to have an inheritance? That's a huge one for them. Familial support, long life. That's another one. This is also something, in another form of that, something that is technically a form of physiognomy, palm reading. Because it's judging the body. That people tie that in with both face, health, personality. That's sort of a secondary thing.
That
There's
reminds
some
me.
stuff too that there's
I'm sorry if I could just interject. That also reminds me of the possibility that there are other professions who have been using this for a very long time up to the present without really identifying it with the term physiognomy, right? So, like fortune tellers or mentalists, or who else would need to do this? I don't know, freaking like,
psychiatrists.
yeah, authorities too, detectives, or
Con artists.
yeah, con artists.
Detectives are a big one. There's was it Lombardo or Levent? They're one of the major figures in modern physiognomy is an Italian gentleman, and I don't know. I'm blanking on his name, but you can find him if you look it up. Italian physiognomy guy, and he is his big theory was a theory of atavism. So he tied it in with Darwinism, and he is actually the father of criminal profiling as a whole. And
Cesare Lombroso.
Lombroso, there we go. Not Lombardo, Lombroso. So Lombroso was an Italian figure. He started all of criminal profiling. Goes back to him. And he was a physiognomist. Not like a classically trained physiognomist, like I would be, not the same kind of school, but he was judging people by their body and by their appearance. And his big insight or theory was that he believed he synthesized it with Darwinian evolution and those theories. And he believed that criminals were actually atavistic evolutionary throwbacks. So, people were just getting into paleontology at the time. People had just dug up Cro-Magnon man. And so he said, hey, all these criminals we're catching on the streets of Italy, they've all got the heavy brow ridge, the deep set eyes, they're real hairy. So he had this theory that you get a genetic evolutionary throwback, and that's how you get these so-called perpetual criminals.
Is that what atavism means?
Atavism means evolutionary throwback. Yeah.
Gotcha. It's like degenerate or regressive or something?
Yeah, they would use terms because it was the Victorian era, so they would get real harsh with it. So they would use terms like degenerate, like I don't know if they would go so far as to say subhuman. Maybe some might have, but like inferior racial stock, all these like nasty loaded terms. Because they were cops and talking about criminals, right? So there was no love lost there for sure. So Lombroso's a big figure. I've been asked about him on interviews before. I haven't really looked into his stuff too much. I know the general overview. Definitely some interesting theories, but don't know if I particularly subscribe to it. But that's a great example of using it practically. Like detectives, there was a huge push for that in Europe, but also somewhat in America in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So those are the three main uses of physiognomy historically. Personality assessment, especially for stuff like trustworthiness and romantic compatibility, somewhat matchmaking. Health is a huge one. And then fortune telling, fate. The latter two are the main emphasis in Chinese face reading, especially because they want to know about health and wealth with everything they do, whether it's acupuncture or Chinese astrology. It's all about that. In the West, people care about the personality stuff.
Let me ask you this. If I was to, be assessed for my physiognomy and I didn't like what I found out, can I change it? Or is it just kind of fixed? Like if I found out that I'm going to be a poor, uninheriting criminal who has bad romantic decisions and I don't know what the hell. It would be some terrible fate awaits me. Can I rearrange it? And if I did, would my physiognomy change? Like if I committed myself to not being a criminal and to becoming more pro-social and learning how to date better and blah, 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 made myself wealthy by just hard work and perseverance, like would my face change to reflect that?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe so. I don't know about the destiny stuff, but I don't really cover that. I don't know if I necessarily buy that per se. That's the Chinese thing. I do Western face reading. I focus on the personality because there's no action mechanism for that, really. For the personality stuff, there's a very direct action mechanism of genetics. You get one gene and it affects one gene variant, and it'll affect a ton of things, both physically and in brain development and all that stuff. So there's correlation there. And I believe that thanks to epigenetics, hormones, the magic of gene expression, you're not on a fixed path. You read these older writers, you read Lothrop Stoddard and these sort of radical, genetic determinist figures from the turn of the 20th century, where they, figured out genetics, figured out evolution. They were like, all right, your genes, once you've got them, it's a set path for life. Well, it's not that way. We found out about epigenetics and gene expression, and we found out it's a lot more complex. So I believe in pretty much every school of physiognomy, from China to the West and everywhere in between, will agree with this. You can change your face by changing your personality. This is something the black pillars, right? I post about my stuff on TikTok, and I get incel types and looks maxers and black pillars coming into it. And they want to tell you, well, you've got to do like bone smashing, all this crazy stuff in order to look good. But they've termed this, I've had guys in my comment turn this inner light maxing. But I do believe in it. And
what's the craziest thing you've seen? You ever seen somebody come back for another reading and just look like a completely different person before?
I have not really. I've seen some change in my own life for myself. So when I was in high school, I was an ugly little chud. I was not good looking at all.
Do you know that movie Chud? Have you heard of that movie?
Yeah, the cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. Those guys. Chud. The crazy thing is, I was just talking to a Russian friend about this. Chud is if you look up Chud on Wikipedia without the dots in between, it's a Russian word for Finnish people. So like when the ancient Slavs first met like Finns and Estonians and stuff, they were like, oh, they're Chuds. And then Chuds became like a mythological creature like goblins in Russian mythology, because they were so freaked out by the Finns. Which if you've ever been to Finland or met Finnish people, you'll understand, because they are crazy.
It's really interesting. I didn't know that connection, but I do know that in Russian, chudak is like, ak is often the end for words to reference a person, and chudak is this like super crazy person. But chuda is like miracle. And so I always associated that it was etymologically derived from like a person who does wild and crazy miracles. But the idea that that the Finns were Chuds is crazy. I didn't know this.
So what transformed you from a Chud into a Confederate general?
From Chud to Chad, as I might say. No, I'm not that good looking, but the Confederate general I'll take. Make my ancestors proud. So personal development, religion helped. So at my worst, my lowest point, this would be junior year of high school. I'm social media addict, hopeless romantic, always constantly sad and angry, blaming the world, self-loathing, mutating into narcissism as a cope, and blaming the world, blaming society. Very extremely resentful, spiteful, and I was not a good-looking kid. I had kind of, the basics are here. Like I've always had huge eyebrows, big wide splayed ears. I inherit that from these, at least from my dad. The ears are all me. But and this happens. A lot of guys are ugly as teenagers, because teenagers are by and large spiritually ugly, especially teenage boys. They don't know what to do with their lives. And I had an ugly soul at the time. I can say now with hindsight, I was in a dark, towards the end of that first semester, a genuinely dark place. But I bottomed out, and I started my self-improvement ascent. And gradually over time, I started to look better and better. I lost kind of the weird puffiness in my face, got a more refined, slightly elongated face. The ears weren't sticking out quite so much. And generally things just started getting more symmetrical, more orderly, more proportional. That's a big thing, is proportion. So you'll see mugshots of violent criminals and stuff, rioters and whatnot. a lot of times they'll have kind of weirdly disproportionate faces, and that is kind of seen as indicating something disproportional in the personality. So maybe they've got excessive appetites, or they are excessively distrusting. That's what like small little beady eyes would indicate. And so I saw it in myself. I've seen it somewhat in friends, but I think I was kind of a pretty strong case, because I did not like the way I looked for a long time, and eventually kind of came to be that it was just because I was not a great guy at the time, but lots and lots of just focusing on myself kind of begat that transformation. And I believe pretty much anyone can do that.
There's a pretty dramatic change that seems to happen in people's faces when they've been meditating for a long time. You see this in a lot of the spiritual teachers, especially the sort of like the Buddhist ones that people generally take to be enlightened or are. Yeah, I really mistrust people that claim to be enlightened, but I
Mhm.
tend to trust when other people say that they really do seem to be enlightened. And so there's been
Yeah.
multiple cases of these spiritual teachers that people will post photographs of, and you can just see something in their face that's
Mhm.
just truly light. Like it doesn't seem to carry the same weight of the world that other people's faces do. And presumably
Absolutely.
they at some point did.
The transfiguration. Yeah, I've got some I've got a Discord for my Patreon subscribers, and I watch my physiognomy tutorial videos about how to do all this. And I've got a couple Buddhists in there. I think one is actually he's gonna move to Thailand soon to be a Buddhist monk. So I guess he won't be with us for long because he's gonna throw away his phone and everything and live in a cave for a year. I think he's hardcore, but he's great. Love that guy. Yeah, and you can actually see the opposite of people going from good to bad. You guys in the edit, you can pull up the image right now. It's super easy to find. Soviet soldier before and after World War II. Crazy striking image, and you can see every bullet, every metaphorically speaking, every friend lost, every village burned by the Nazis, like burnt it etched into his face. And that's a great example there of and it's not just like, oh, he looks scared. It's like his like you can see his bone structure is different, like subtly. His
I've seen those
musculature is
pictures
all
from
different.
before and after World War One, even just British soldiers too. They're
Yeah,
insane,
World War
actually.
One.
Yeah, like
Um,
18-year-old kids who have just look like they're like 45 or 50. It's wild.
exactly. And because that's it's the outside reflecting the inside. And the action mechanism is obscure. This is why I really wish physiognomy was not, banned from polite science, because it'd be great to get a little bit of grant money, do some research on this. I think it'd be helpful and beneficial to a lot of people into science and medicine stuff as a whole. Figure out the action mechanism. My best guess is epigenetics. So, especially that's a great example. Your body is put into a high stress, high danger situation. Something in your, deep in your biology, something very old and ancient says, all right, war mode, change your face, cortisol levels pumping. That's another thing. Hormones change you dramatically.
Do you know
I mean,
anything
we
about
see this.
do you know anything about like fascial rearrangement too? Have you looked into that at all? Because I've got a friend who's just completely obsessed. He has a fascia theory of everything, like health and well-being, and fascia. Fascia is like this layer that it's like the sack that all of your muscles are coated in, and it kind of keeps it kind of shapes your body in some sense, right?
Mm,
And of course, like you can have fat on top of that, which is going to give shape too. But I mean, this dude I know has like definitely radically transformed his body just through his obsession with fascial rearrangements and the exercises that you do in that realm. And I've often wondered if it isn't in some sense conveying information too regarding what's happening inside of your head, right? Like the way that you hold tension on your body, and
hmm
I mean, this is something
That's
I have like a real serious relationship with. Is like when I get tense, like I actually like feel it in I start getting headaches and pain. My neck like cramps up, and
hmm
like, and I don't really notice it till the interaction's over that's making me tense. But I imagine that if that's prolonged in various ways, it doesn't have to, I don't know, tension is just kind of the word I'm using, but it could be something else where you actually start to solidify like those fascial connections, like what would you say? Reinforce themselves, and it becomes actually kind of this permanent structure after some point, which might
Absolutely.
have epigenetic components to it as well. There might be like chemical basis for it to some extent, but it might be
The-
just a biophysical mechanical level
yeah.
to it as well.
The term I always use for that when asked about it is neuromuscular. I call it the neuromuscular factors with the fascia. That's a great tie, and that's pretty much what I've been talking about with that. Is that they are, the idea is it's sort of the old expression: you hold your face that way, it's going to be stuck that way. Well, it's kind of true, actually. A great little example from face reading is that so when your expression is neutral, sometimes your mouth is level. For a lot of people, it'll be the tips will be upturned slightly or downturned slightly. And what is that from? Well, if you're smiling all the time, it's going to be upturned. If you're downturned, you're frowning a lot, it's going to be downturned. And so in face reading, it said that people with upturned corners naturally optimistic, people with downturned corners naturally pessimistic. And if it's asymmetrical, it can actually show pessimism in your inner world versus your outer world, private versus professional life.
There's kind of a chicken or egg thing here with this too, right? Because I know that there's some studies I've come across where it's like and I guess just in my own personal experience, like if you do sort of lean into the resting smile versus the resting bitch face, then you do feel better, and maybe you actually end up being more optimistic as a result of it. Like, which comes first, kind of thing.
Well, that leads to the other element of this that's much more controversial. I think it's pretty universally accepted that you change how you are inside, the outside will match. But there's sort of a two-way street, as above, so below thing here, especially in morphopsychology in the French school that I study. When this gets into plastic surgery, which is a big thing that people always ask about, especially on TikTok. A lot of ladies are asking, what about a nose job? And so there are competing schools of thought here. You ask Chinese face reader, they're going to say it's a scar, they say. So they say that scars, plastic surgery, discount that. Just say it just doesn't count because it's not originating from the genes, from the hormones, from the original thing. Morphopsychologists, you ask someone like, whether they're practicing it in France or in America, they all say it will have an effect. And some of them get a little more mystical with the explanations. But there are some more kind of grounded theories of action mechanism with that. So one might be potentially hormonal or neuromuscular. So if your neurons are telling your muscles to hold a certain way based on a certain mood, your muscles are different, your neurons are feeling different. That's potentially going back up to the brain. Memory and personality is a complex thing, and we've always liked to think of the brain as a black box of memory and of the soul, because as I just listened to a podcast about this guy. I forget his name, but his book is The American Religion. And in that, he says that the American religion is fundamentally Gnostic. And, we hate the body, we love the spirit, we believe in hidden knowledge, and that the world is kind of the devil. And there's kind of two sides of that, where you get, we can fix the world and reform it and change it. The other side is this sort of retreatist American spirituality that you especially see I'm from the deep South, so evangelical Southern Baptist sort of circles. The world is wicked and we got to isolate from it. Mormons going off to establish a new promised land. And because of that, we don't like to think of the soul and body as being connected. We were really, Americans, especially the deep South religious Americans, they don't like evolution, which, not to say there aren't holes in the Darwinian consensus. I mean, there's certainly a lot to be said for that and alternative theories potentially. But just temperamentally, there's this hostility towards that. And not just from, the creationists and Bible thumpers, who are my people, much love to them, but from liberals too, from these so-called progressive, rational atheists. There is an innate temperamental hostility towards any sort of, like we were sort of talking about at the beginning, genetic determinism, biological determinism. And part of that is this idea that all Americans believe in the soul. by and large, just intuitively. Even if they say, I'm an atheist, there is no soul. You believe in a soul. You act like you believe in a soul. The whole transgender thing, the way that's premised nowadays, it used to be have a much more kind of level thing with transgenderism and the transgender community back in the sort of late 20th century, the way that was going on. You can actually find articles from the 40s and 50s about, World War II vet getting a sex change, and there's no hostility there. It's treated like a curiosity. Like, yeah, I think they say like GI Joe becomes GI Jane or something, and it's just like, wow, this troop decided he was a lady, and she's living a great life now, and there was no political baggage there. But it's sort of been altered now, where it's like, no, I'm actually a woman because my soul is, I have a misplaced soul. So there's this weird spiritualism loaded into all of American culture that makes us not want to think that your body has anything to do with you. In soul, I'm this way. I'm totally different. My body doesn't reflect that. That kind of flies right in the face of biology and of genetics. I mean, you guys know all about that. And
I just don't see them being at odds with one another. I'm so perplexed by people that see it as one or the other in any of these discussions, right? We come across this all the time in basic physics too, where it's like, people have a really hard time looking at it as a continuum in any sense, like as there being a spiritual reality which is still playing out on a material plane.
Exactly. It's like the religion versus science false dichotomy, where it's, I'm from Decatur, Alabama originally, which is right south of Huntsville. And so they love Werner von Braun up there. And people like to say he was a Nazi. Well, he was a German in the 30s, like
the Rocket Man.
Yeah. The guy just wanted to build rockets. He was probably autistic. Most Germans are. And he just wanted to build rockets. Talk to some Germans and tell me I'm wrong. I've met them. They're great at parties, but they're not like, they're stand against the wall, hold a beer kind of guys. I love
a couple of them staying with us recently, actually.
Yeah. And so
lovely people.
They're great. I love them. And,
I remember we had in grad school we had a friend who was German Swiss, and they came over for dinner one night, and Shiloh was making pizza, and the guy had this existential breakdown over the fact that he was like, I don't know what you want to call this, but this isn't pizza. And he got super emotional about it, and he was like,
he almost walked out. It was nuts. I was like, what is happening? This is unreal. He's just like, you can't call this pizza. Like, he's like, it's good, but you can't call it pizza. You just can't do it.
I love the German harshness. There's a certain kind of like big-headed, harsh German. It's like the lineage of Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Werner Herzog, where it's just this harsh German pessimism. I love it. But Werner von Braun, not so much that kind of German, but he had a great thing about religion and science are not at odds. And same thing with body and soul. It's a holistic system. That's, you go to like Descartes and he says the pineal gland is the seat of the soul. I think, I'm a Christian, so I do believe in a soul. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't necessarily know about seat of the soul kind of thing. I think the soul's in the body. I mean, Christians actually are actually much more aligned with this than say Hindus or Buddhists would be, because they will say the body's just a shell and the soul gets recycled through all sorts of different bodies. Christians say the soul is made for the body and vice versa. And that, people and modern Americans, because they're kind of Gnostic, they like to say, we'll die and go to heaven and we'll escape this body. Well, heaven's the waiting room. If you actually read the Bible and read the New Testament and read the Church Fathers, the end result of Christianity is resurrection, bodily resurrection. Your body it's perfected and glorified and transfigured, and all the specific theological terms they use for it. But there is a strong link between body and soul, and so I think the soul's all in the body, not necessarily just trapped in the brain like a black box. If you do want to use terms like soul. Have you seen
those insane studies where people are missing like most of their brain and they didn't even know it? Like it was just full of water. Their head was full of water or something like that. I mean, this happens all the time.
Is highly compressible. And the big one that blew my mind was you ever gotten into heart transplant studies? You ever
that stuff is insane. Yeah. A little bit. Tell me though, which one you're talking about.
I've read through a number of them, and they are I think one of the most discomforting, in the sense of like shaking you out of your comfort zone, not necessarily like terrifying or disturbing, maybe somewhat, honestly. Some of the most disruptive, like verified medical case studies I've ever read. It just totally blows the lid off everything that we know about science. Where after a heart transplant, this lady gets a heart transplant from this young guy who died in a motorcycle crash. All of a sudden, she likes beer and buys a motorcycle. And they don't know anything about the people who died. Like, you just get the heart, and the doctor observes this after the fact. You've had heart transplant recipients who they'll have dreams of meeting, I had a dream where I met this little girl. A young boy has this dream. Oh, I met this little girl and she had the blonde hair and the blue dress. And he describes the donor. He's describing the heart transplant donor. People will get, a taste, little things like a taste for peppers, or big things. Like, there was I think a middle-aged woman got a heart transplant from a young guy, and I think she was unmarried, but she went lesbian after it. So change of sexuality, lots of things. And that's just look up heart transplant studies or heart transplant cases, and memory transplant. And yeah, heart transplant memories, that's the Google search term. And you can find some great stuff from, it would be one thing if this was like on a blog, like on a new age blog. I'd be like, okay, that's neat. But it's, you download this from like the health institute websites, and it's just on there, and they're like, yeah, that's a thing. So that will rock your world right there. And I think that's a great case study of how interconnected this whole system is. To tie back with physiognomy, is that personality, and the brain isn't a black box. It's all interconnected. The same genes that make up your body, tell your body how to be made, they tell your brain how to be made. And a lot of times it's the same genes doing both things. Whether it's genes or hormones is another thing. This is something I brought up, transgenderism. We see with that. We're seeing a lot about the effect of hormones and stuff, where it affects you both physically and mentally. A higher testosterone guy is going to have deeper set eyes, heavy brow ridge, big jaw. Shiloh, you're kind of looking that way, actually.
I've not had my testosterone checked, but we'll worry about that problem when we come to it.
I don't know. You're looking pretty good. It could just be you have like a Scandinavian kind of look, and they're kind of robust. I don't know if you have any actual like Norwegian ancestry or anything, but
I was going to ask you if you might give us like a cold reading, but then I was like, oh, you already kind of know who we are, so it
a little bit.
Yeah. Does that are you able to read people that you know or get any information, or do you find that you're too contaminated by really already having the answers in some sense?
I've worked a lot. I work a lot on trying to take that out, and especially doing this full-time profession, like doing this for clients and stuff on a pretty regular basis. My brain has kind of been trained to just look at the feature, like just laser in and only look at the individual elements of that. Because if you want to be thorough and you want to do it right, that's why I don't do live readings generally. Like, I'll do it on a podcast, but if I'm doing it for a paid client, I tell them, let's not do Zoom. Send me pictures, because that's obviously better image quality. But like, if I want to be good with this, I'm not gonna, and I want to be thorough, and I want someone to get their money's worth. I'm not gonna just be like, oh, that kind of looks this way. That I'm gonna sit and look at the person, zoom in and out, and examine.
Are you like doing
angles.
Measurements? Are you like referencing?
Not so much
charts?
measurements. There's some that involve measurements, but it's mostly proportional measurements. So one example is eye width. So the Vitruvian man ideal eye length, the average eye length, is one eye's width in between. And so that's a perfectly like balanced perspective. If you've got greater than one eye width apart, that means that you are big picture focused, tolerant, low disgust impulse, kind of spacey if they're really far apart. And likewise for the opposite. If, you kind of, and I'll just do I'll zoom in enough so I can just kind of use my thumb to sort of get the measurement of one eye and see how it is relative to the distance in between. Close set eyes, if it's less than one eye width in between, then that indicates that someone is very detail focused, very meticulous, kind of nitpicky, and high disgust impulse. So
It's
there's a
interesting
few
that
things like that, but
those would
it's
cluster together, like detail
yeah.
and disgust impulse. Do you know if that trends in other psychological literature?
I haven't looked into it in particular, but it was sort of so a lot of this stuff, pretty much all of my stuff as I practice it, I draw from multiple sources. And so I first observed this was actually one of my first strong physiognomy observations that got me into the whole thing, is that people I knew with close set eyes were really detail oriented, really nitpicky. And then I looked it up, and and then I thought, well, it makes sense actually, because the people I know with wide set eyes, they're very tolerant and spacey and aren't detail oriented, big picture. And so I look it up and I find some website that says correlates it with disgust impulse, high versus low disgust impulse. And I think, oh well, that's pretty different. Well, that's actually not, because if you're more detail focused, more sensitive to minor things, you're gonna feel more easily disgust. You can tie it in with the word judgmental, but then with the wide set eyes, it's more tolerant, big picture, don't really care for the details. Oh, that's a minor thing. Put that aside. Focus on the bigger thing. See the forest for the trees. My wife and I are a great case study of this. She's got close set eyes. I've got wide set eyes. So when we discuss things, I'm very big picture. I'm like, oh, look at the big thing. But she's catching me on all the little details I'm skimming over, because I just don't care. And I care when it's important, right? When it's like a customer or like an urgent thing. But with a lot of things that I would consider minor, she wants to pay attention because everything has to be right.
It's
And
interesting
then,
for the distance between the eyes, how that would feed back onto the actual like neural correlates of perception. Because the way that the optics work, if your
Mhm.
eyes are at different distances, must feed back into the brain somehow.
Well, there is stuff about this. This is one case where there is actually scientific. I don't know if you could necessarily call it proof, but there has been some research done on eye width and this facial feature in relation to neural development. Specifically, there's a 2019 study about autistic facial features, trying to find autistic physiognomy. They don't necessarily use that word. The title of the article is Craniofacial Characteristics in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders. I'll send the link to y'all real quick. Um, and so they identify two facial features that are significantly enough correlated with autism spectrum disorders, ASD, to be considered like scientifically significant. Where they're like, there's something here. First is ocular hypertelorism, which is the big fancy $10 word for wide set eyes. The other is a small mid face. So like this area here, proportionally smaller. The ideal proportions are, this is a third, this is a third, this is a third. And those two actually correlate with physiognomy. Because wide set eyes, it's big picture. What is autism? Autism is a lack of synaptic pruning in the youth. So an autistic brain is excessively interconnected. Temple Grandin, I think she's had, you guys know her, of course. Um, her brain has been scanned before, and there's a great side by side of normal brain, Temple Grandin's brain. And Temple Grandin's brain is just like a bramble patch of neural connections. And that's what autism is. It's excessive neural connection. It's taking in too much information. It's being too big picture viewed. So autistic brain receives information, no idea what to do with it. This is why autistic people are fixated on systems. This is why they get overstimulated, because when it's physical stimulus, there's no set pathways. The brain hasn't snipped the neural pathways to make those pathways. Everything connects to everything else. So you get one sound, neurotypical brain says, oh, it's a loud sound. I'll send that to the loud sound part of the brain. Autistic person hears a loud sound. It fills the whole brain, and the whole brain is getting loud sound. Same thing with social cues, that sort of stuff.
So it's
And
it's
there's
really
not this.
interesting because you can imagine that an over-connected brain is one that is under more tension, where it's like if
Mhm.
you assume that every single synaptic connection has some kind of elastic modulus, which basically allows the brain to either stretch
Mhm.
or constrict, that the more of those connections that you have, the more that it would kind of tense the entire thing into a more and more compact shape. And then it manifests on the face where you have these smaller distances. That would be
Mhm.
crazy if that was true.
That is very interesting because the midface thing in physiognomy, those facial thirds are said to correlate with intellectual interest, social and emotional interest, and material interest. Which what do autistic people not care about? It's social stuff, social cues. And that may come from that. The interesting thing with the synaptic pruning thing, so that's why autistic people they manually create arbitrary systems in order to classify things. Like they have comfort foods, comfort things, in order to avoid overstimulation and to be able to understand people, social stuff. Um, and they go for these comfortable, safe things. Uh, you know what you call a brain that has too much synaptic pruning in youth, and then is doesn't have enough neural connections?
Mm-mm.
Schizophrenic.
Hmm.
It's their opposite ends of the spectrum, no pun intended. And so schizophrenics, and there's lots of correlations with autism being opposite of schizophrenia.
Hmm.
Um, Autism is correlated with high birth rate, high birth weight. Schizophrenia is strongly correlated with low birth weight. There's the extreme male brain theory of autism, which is that autistic people are overly systematizing. What's the opposite of that? What's the female brain? It's empathizing. And so the empathizing is like reading other people's emotions, seeing messages in things. Um, and so a schizophrenic brain, not enough neural connections, whereas the autistic person creates arbitrary categories, arbitrary boundaries to protect the overly connected brain. The schizophrenic person creates arbitrary connections to kind of feed and enhance a poorly connected brain.
Are
So
there
this is where you get
physical differences in the way that their faces are organized?
um there's I couldn't tell you what the features are, um, but I can there's a schizophrenic look, and some of it might be just physical, so like just a gauntness to the face because like maybe they aren't eating as much because they think their food's been poisoned or something. Not to be too glib with it or anything, but if you look at someone like Terry A. Davis, the schizophrenic computer programmer, some of it is pretty directly psychological, like a certain look in the eyes, right? That's psychological. It's holding the eyes a certain way, certain gauntness to the face. Um, I've before I actually read the study, I independently identified the wide set eyes thing from seeing other autists, where wide set eyes, kind of negative canthal tilt. Um, Autism, you can definitely see in the. I think you can mostly see both of them in the eyes. Um, where schizophrenia is kind of like smaller, but kind of round eyes. They're kind of beadier, but more. They still seem kind of like wide eyed. It's a very interesting look, and if you know or meet any schizophrenic people, you can kind of tell it, or even if they're just like schizotypal, like leaning that way, not fully diagnosed, like hallucinating, paranoid schizophrenic. If they're just wired, because you can be, you know, adjacent. You just have a little extra synaptic pruning, and then you're, just like a slightly paranoid personality, but not fully schizophrenic.
The type of guy you want to keep the LSD away from.
Yes, that's people who will get totally mind broken by the psychedelics. Uh, Even weed. Some guys get totally mind ruined by weed because they're getting so much THC in it now.
God, I've seen that happen. It's a nightmare. I actually think it's one of the more dangerous psychedelic drugs at high doses for certain individuals. Like
Yeah,
worse than the more name brand psychedelics, I feel like.
yeah. I don't. I try not to mess around with it. But yeah, that's a whole lot on the kind of neurological stuff. Um,
Well, speaking of psychedelics, though, I wonder if it couldn't be applied towards, like, I wonder if you wouldn't see parallel transformations in people's faces, because you hear all the time about people having these come to Jesus moments with psychedelics where they completely rearrange their life. I've heard everything like as extreme from quitting cigarettes, quitting drugs, losing allergies, like insane transformations in the body. And I wonder if there wouldn't be a parallel database with some of these psychedelic studies that would emerge where you could actually see some of these features being rearranged in people's faces. Like the thing that you said happened to you when you were a teenager, that sort of transformative moment that you had where you put your life back on this path and you said that your physiognomy rearranged to correspond. I wonder if you wouldn't see that in some of these people who are having these psychedelic rearrangements in midlife. I mean, there's a ton of work going on surrounding these things right now, especially over at like MAPS and places like that, Johns Hopkins.
Yeah, I would have to look into that because I would not be surprised, and I'm sure you could probably easily find before and after psychedelic pictures. Make a note of that actually, because that's a really good idea actually for a video maybe.
Pardon the interruption, but I have to ask you for a favor. If you are listening to this podcast and you are enjoying it, then consider coming over to patreon.com/DemystifySci. Our mission is to keep this program eternally free of advertisements and sponsorships, and so we can only do that with your help. You can support the project with as little as 75 cents a week. And I hope to see you there at patreon.com/DemystifySci. So do you want to show us how this works?
Sure. I can analyze y'all if you'd like.
I think that might be really interesting. Just in the sense of, because up until this point, it's been this sort of theoretical landscape, and so maybe if we could see.
People have been analyzing us in the comments section for years, so see how it matches up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if we're gonna go with ladies first, so I would peg you as having mostly a Let's go all the way with it. Can I see your side profile? You might want to pull your hair back so I can see your jawline.
You're gonna see my gigantic ears.
There they are. Aha! Women are
still
so
hidden.
sneaky with that hair. So, okay, that's about what I figured. Okay, so you look like a pretty pure choleric to me. Oh my gosh. I love the ears so much. I don't know what it is.
I love the ears too.
When I was a kid, my mom would try to tie them back.
Oh my gosh.
I never grew into them.
I love it. It's adorable. It's endearing. I don't want to come across like I'm hitting on you or anything, but it's like I don't know. I think it's giving like classic Anne Hathaway is what it is. It's like it's awesome. Maybe I'm just biased because I have giant ears too.
I was gonna say I'm like you and I. You and I operate in the same scales.
That's so dope.
But okay, so I turned and you immediately were like, okay, choleric. What'd you see?
Yeah, choleric, high forehead, chinless level with that forehead, obtuse angle to the jawline. The jawline seems like kind of could be ambiguous, but at least you're mostly choleric. So choleric, think, plan, generally act in the long term. Pretty willful. You are a positive pessimist. So you very acutely see all the problems in the world, but that doesn't discourage you. You don't get all doom and gloom. It encourages you to take actions to solve that. Generally, pretty energetic. Not too much need for sleep, I would think. I'm hedging a bit more here because your jaw. Can I see your jawline again?
Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, let me just get in the light. Okay. That's what I thought. So it looks like your jawline actually kind of, there's not too much of an angle to it. It looks like it kind of runs from the chin straight to the ear. So that
checks out.
Yeah. Because choleric, I think, Shiloh, I think you've got choleric jawline. Let me see your side profile real quick. Now you're actually pretty sanguine. So choleric jawline is, pure choleric jawline is obtuse angle to it. And so the side profile tells us about the temperament. These are the inborn characteristics. This is mostly energy level, sleep, work style, that sort of stuff.
Does that mean that I need more sleep than Nastia?
You do. So
It
you
is
actually,
true.
you would.
I like almost double.
I sleep a lot. It is true. I mean,
Now, let me
regular,
ask you,
not
because
a lot, but like
your jawline's still kind of indeterminate. How much do you sleep?
me personally, or Nastia? Sorry, which one of us are you asking?
Anastasia. Saskia,
I
how do you?
can do. I'm okay on like 5 hours.
5 hours? Okay. You probably just have are you probably just pure colic then? Probably just a subtle
You sleep
angle.
more than 5 hours most nights, so let's be honest.
Because
I don't usually go to bed until like 2, 3.
So 6 or 7 then, I would
Okay.
say.
All right.
Yeah.
you're like me. Well, when I was getting this whole brand launched, I was working full time retail, so and I had a baby and a wife and all that, so I just got in the habit of staying up super late, and eventually I guess I'll start sleeping normal hours, but I can do it because I'm mostly colic as well. So that indicates to me you're colic because each element of the side profile, there's actually 5 elements to reading a temperament. The main ones are the side profile. That's forehead, chin, jawline. There's also some stuff with body type and skin tone, like the undertone to the skin. You can usually tell this from the palm is the most reliable way, but you can just look at the undertones compared to like the racial average, right? So it's going to look different on black people than white people, Asians, all that. So I would say you're mostly colic because if you had if you had no angle to your jawline, kind of a recessed jawline, that would be melancholic. That would indicate that you think and you start in the long term, you're very choleric, but in the long term, you know, as you go through the long term, I should say, you become more melancholic and you kind of get exhausted over time and bored and impatient. I'm choleric with a sanguine jawline, so I have that kind of like Shiloh-ish, sharp 90-degree angle to my jawline. So that indicates that I'm like you, mostly choleric. I think and start things in the long term planner, positive pessimist. Very little need for sleep. Go go go. But I get bored in the long term when I'm implementing this because sanguines. You'll read sanguine in old books as a way to describe like someone who's very optimistic, outgoing, enthusiastic, impulsive. This is mostly Shiloh, I think. I think Shiloh is mostly sanguine. He might have a bit of a choleric forehead, but chin and jaw look pretty sanguine. So pretty muscle coordinated. Love athletics. Probably needs to drink lots of water. Big nap fan. Like I love like a good mid afternoon nap. Cholerics are
is
long
true.
term runners. Sanguines are short term runners. You can think of all the great athletes and optimists of our society, the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and Tony Robbins and Mike Tyson's, power lifters and motivational speakers, politicians, salesmen. Those are the sanguines. So I'm kind of a mix there. So the downside for me is in work because I make all these big plans and then I've had to make myself a slave basically for years to be able to like do something long term. But the upside is with social stuff. So I'm very choleric, very professional, austere, kind of business minded when I meet people, almost robotic. But then once I get to know them, once I get comfortable, I open up and I become super jokey, jovial, outgoing, optimistic. That's my sanguine side coming out. So you have these sort of 4 pure temperaments, but people can have a mix of features from all of them. And I get that with a lot of my clients. Like I do get some people who are purely of one temperament, which is like a great, nice, easy read. But a lot, this is one case where you kind of get the complexity of people. So that's your temperament. That's both y'all's temperament, actually. Back to you, Anastasia. I'd say your face shape, probably mostly, I would call it the sun face shape. So you have about 11 face shapes. Some people say 12, but I say 11. I've been talking with this Italian Catholic philosopher who's been sending me his physiognomy theories. And I get like a lot of emails from people who are like, but it's mostly like video requests. This one I really like though, because he knows his stuff. He's a big Thomas Aquinas fan because he's a Catholic Italian. And but he tied in we've been talking about the 11 face shapes and like the irascible passions and the concupiscible passions way over my head. This guy's big into Aristotle and Thomism. Interesting stuff. But all to say, generally 11 face shapes, and the temperament's generally said to be what you're born with. They're your starting cards. The face shape is said to be your persona. What does persona mean? Persona is the Latin word for mask. And so their face shape is kind of what you acquire over time based on like I said, this Italian guy was tying it in with the passions, the 11 passions of man. But it's kind of almost like a coping strategy. You can think in terms of like Myers-Briggs versus Enneagram. Myers-Briggs is about how you're wired. Enneagram is about how you react and how you adapt to the world. So with the sun face shape, that's kind of an oval face shape generally. Um, I don't know. Looking at you, Mal, because sun face, you would have more of a tapering towards the jaw and the chin. Your jaw seems pretty level to your forehead. It seems like an even oblong face shape. Now that I'm looking at you more straight on,
That's
that
the
is
bean.
more of that's the Neptune face shape actually. So they're similar. Any sort of long, narrow face shape is going to be more spiritual, intellectual, high-minded, sort of think a stereotypical like egghead professor kind of type. Oh, not to call out eggheads and professors, but that's just where my mind went to. Where
I'll take
like
it.
a spiritualist, like a guru. Like every depiction of Jesus, he's got a long face. That's my go-to example. And yeah, I've analyzed Jesus and the Shroud of Turin and the depictions. The Orthodox guys love that one because they love their icons.
Did he pay well?
Oh, misheard. Yeah,
Bad joke.
that is a pretty good joke. I have auditory processing issues. So just like my father before him and his father before him. So my wife keeps telling me I need to get hearing aids, but I don't know if that'll help. Anyways, Neptune face shape. So that's the prophet archetype. So face shape is kind of like the broad strokes of the personality. You develop it over time, and your face shape can and does change over time. Temperament, not so much. But you kind of get new personas, new masks for new phases of life. So at this point, you've got a pretty strong prophet archetype going. Comparisons would be, I have some images here. I don't have any lady examples that I can name. I have some celebrity pictures, but I wasn't able to find the names. But in terms of men, you guys know Jonathan Pajot?
Mhm.
Yeah, Jonathan Pajot is a great example of a pure Neptune face shape. For kind of the dark side of it, you can go to H.P. Lovecraft. And so at their best, they're very spiritual people, very independent. They have a self-directed sense of morality. They say can be confused by relationships at times. And the big strokes are independent, spiritual, intellectual, strong artistic bent. So that's where you get the Lovecraft tie-in. And even with his stuff, right? He's a science fiction pulp author from the early 20th century, and he's still drawn to talking about cults and ancient gods and stuff like this. My buddy Chris Gabriel, meme analysis, he has a very similar look to Jonathan Pajot, and he's sort of like the dark mirror of him, because Jonathan Pajot talks about religious symbolism from an Orthodox Christian perspective. Meme analysis, Chris Gabriel, he goes by God Disc on Substack and other stuff. He writes for Rick Rubin's website, Tetragrammaton. He's like a Jung, Freud, Crowley guy, and he analyzes the symbolism of memes and tarot and cultural symbols. So they have very similar face shapes and kind of similar features, but one, Jonathan Pajot has a much nicer facial features, which we'll get into soon. That fills in the details. Then Chris Gabriel has much more aggressive features. If he opens his mouth, you see he has these fangs, very sharp canines. That indicates aggression, kind of social hostility, which he loves being a provocateur. Fascinating character, that guy. But that's a good case study of, if you have a similar face shape, similar temperament, the broad strokes are the same. It's similar archetype. That's why I use the word archetype for these face shapes. But then with the finer details, the shape of the eyes, the mouth, the teeth, all that, you fill in the details, and you can actually get pretty different perspectives doing the same general thing, right? These are two guys on YouTube, both talking about kind of spiritual symbolism, but they have totally opposite perspectives. One guy is an Orthodox Christian, and the other guy is like I don't know if he's fully Thelema. I don't think he's a Satanist or anything, but he's like a Crowleyite occultist.
And this is the
Chris Gabriel.
Chris Gabriel.
His YouTube channel is Meme Analysis. He's pretty inactive now. He's going on adventures. He has a crazy life. But he's got good stuff on deep psychological and occult symbolism in memes, of all things. And he's we're I'll call it acquaintances. We've talked some about. He's asked me about physiognomy. I call him my astrologer, because if there's ever anything where I'm like, is the planet doing something right now? Is that real? I ask him, and I'm like, "Hey, what's Saturn doing right now? Do you know anything about that?" And he'll give me this whole big analysis that I don't really know about, but yeah. So that's your face shape. That's your main temperament, personality, archetype. Pretty long nose, I would say, that indicates patience, thoughtfulness. It's generally thought over action. Real short nose people, they're very action oriented. I've got friends with short noses, and they're the guys who are like, you go to hang out with them, and they do not want to just sit around and talk about stuff. They want to go do something. Um, you're kind of the opposite. You're more of a thinker. Actually, fun fact with that, there is a Hebrew idiom that you find throughout the Old Testament, where you'll read it translated as patient or long suffering. The literal word, I've forgotten the Hebrew for it. I can remember the Arabic equivalent, but I can't remember the actual Hebrew, so I'm not going to try. Um, it's long of nose.
Hmm.
And God actually describes himself this way when he's talking to Moses. He said, I am Yahweh, I'm the Lord, your God, long of nose. And that gets translated as patient or long suffering, but the literal word is long nosed. There's some modern theories where they say, oh, that refers to takes them a long time to flare their nostrils in anger. Total BS, because every school of face reading, from the Arabs to the Greeks to the Chinese, they all say long nose is more patient, short nose is more impulsive. So obvious tying there. So physiognomy is in the Bible in subtle linguistic ways, in the same sort of way that in English we talk about things being highbrow, lowbrow, keeping a stiff upper lip, wide-eyed. We talked about eye width, but that also refers to eye size more so, which is about trust. That is, you're very open, innocent. You take in a lot. I would say both of you guys are slightly more narrow-eyed, I would say. Not necessarily beady-eyed, not fully cynical or untrusting, but perceptive for sure. And you're very acutely assessing everything that you're taking in. Your worldview is very Shiloh, especially. Shiloh has very kind of deep set, narrow eyes, very perceptive. I don't imagine nothing gets past you.
Yeah, I get accused of looking mean all the time. I try really hard not to, especially when I'm thinking about physics for some reason. When I'm
He's
really,
got this
really
little furrow.
yeah, like when someone's explaining something to me and I'm trying to really, really understand what they're getting at, I think I just start to look like I'm gonna bite their face off or something. I don't know what it is. It's just
Like, look
No,
at that
I've noticed that
furrow
during
that you
this interview.
developed.
I'm especially
I'm a
attuned to
nice
that
guy, I
as
swear.
like a lifelong autist. You eventually learn to, like, the hair stand up on your neck when you're like, oh, am I doing a social thing wrong? I have no idea. You're like watching. Am I talking too much? Am I ruining the social interaction? But no, it's chill. We're chilling. But yeah, and
It's
you,
just the way I
Anastasia, I
look,
would say
unfortunately.
pretty curved eyebrows. I would say. Um, that means that you are in decision making. You are pretty consensus oriented, empathetic. You like to make decisions based on kind of the feelings of others around you. That is why that is the stereotypical feminine eyebrow shape. That's the societally imposed feminine ideal. Where it's like, well, a lady like eyebrows are going to be curved because subconsciously people think, oh, well, a lady should be consensus oriented, should go off other people's feelings when making a decision. And that we know in real life that's often not the case. Some ladies will have straight eyebrows, which means that they're more kind of logical, facts based. Some will have sharply arched eyebrows, and those ones are those ones are the crazies. Now we love them, but because those arched eyebrows, that means that their decision making process is based primarily on assertion of control, kind of jealousy. Great example for this. I just recorded a video about this guy the other day. Is Benjamin Netanyahu. Super sharp. His eyebrows are like perfect little triangles. And you can see he has that like Machiavellian political killer instinct. Sometimes literally, actually, but the he has a very
Wow, I'd
interesting look.
never noticed that. Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah,
see, let me
because
see.
They're just like little triangles.
Yeah, amazing.
yeah, oh BB. But yeah, so that's most of what I'm seeing with you. Pretty long nose, curved eyebrows. The And I'd say probably it looks like you have a positive canthal tilt. Do you guys know what canthal tilt is, or am I getting too obscure?
Let's do it.
Okay, canthal tilt.
I know that the incels are really worried about
Oh
canthal
yeah,
tilts.
Really?
incels were the ones that popularized the word canthal tilt. So I identified this before I knew what it was called. Um, my when I was first studying this and making notes on it, I called it concave versus convex eyes. And so, take someone's eyes, you draw an imaginary line from the outer corner to the inner corner. What's the angle there? Neutral is flat like this, totally steady. I think mine are mostly neutral. Positive canthal tilt, or what I called it concave eyes, is when it's down like this. Think like a cat. Um, then negative canthal tilt is up like this, droopy eyes, like droopy dog. And so what I've observed, and I don't know if I've ever heard really many physiognomists talk about this directly. Some will mention one thing, they'll say, oh, cat-like eye shows someone seductive. A lot of what you'll find with a lot of these physiognomy authors or face reading authors, they use those terms instead, is that a lot of times they'll kind of describe things in a roundabout way. So they'll describe a bunch of different characteristics that are not the core personality trait associated with the facial feature, they flow down from it. So one lady, I've read some of her stuff, Barbara Roberts, and her stuff's pretty good, but in her arched eyebrow section, she says, "Oh, it means that someone likes vibrant colors." Or a curved eyebrow means that someone likes a peaceful home life. And it's like, well, that's not the thing in and of itself. That's like something downstream from it. That's the reason why I've spent years studying this, is because to kind of suss this out, and I'm trying to clarify this more for people, put out, a book or two eventually, to make this kind of clear. It's like you realize there's something here, but it's being described in kind of like poor, imprecise terms. So that's kind of my mission, is to systematize and make it easier to digest. Um, so it's
What about
different with
Oh, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna ask about facial hair. Like, do people intuitively follow the pre-existing physiognomy with their decisions of regarding facial hair? I mean, or how does it play into things? Do people try to mask their physiognomy with facial hair? Like,
yeah.
do you have a theory of
It's
facial hair?
it's mostly psychological symbolic. So it represents like subconscious impulses. So for example, one thing is that they'll say a full beard represents detachment from the world. Why is that? Well, because lower third of the face, we mentioned, represents material interest and hedonism. So like someone with a really broad, long lower third of the face is going to be more materially involved. Someone with a very sort of small jaw is going to be much more intellectual. You can think of these characters, right? Physiognomy is used all the time in caricature and cartoons. You think of the egghead, logical scientist versus this sort of meathead caveman. And but they say that a beard represents that sort of spiritual detachment because it's covering that up. Another one is that they'll say a mustache represents a separation from material, practical interests, and social emotional stuff. So it's kind of a separation there. Interestingly, the Amish and many other sort of groups, they forbid that. Lots of religious groups forbid mustaches. Amish forbid mustaches. Salafist Muslims forbid mustaches as well. You'll see the terrorist guys, and not to talk about, like, you talk to regular Muslims, like a Syrian taxi driver, and they'll call these guys that too, because there's a certain kind of like Muslim who like gets into the Salafi stuff, and they have a little uniform, like the little cap and the robe and the pants that go above the ankle, because there's all these little regulations in the hadiths about it. But it's like you got to shave the mustache. Part of that, the reasoning for it, at least I know with the Amish, is that they come from Germany, and at the time, German military leaders, they all had big, fantastic mustaches. You think Bismarck and Nietzsche and all these types. So the Amish said, we're going to do the opposite. But I think there's something subconscious, like psychological, going on there with the physiognomy, maybe having to do with not separating the emotional from the physical, like a religious sort of thing. I think I find it very interesting that these religious separatist groups forbid the mustaches. And a lot of times there seems to be the subtext of like these self-important, mighty kings and generals. Where you talk about the Confederate general, right? All these Civil War types, the big, fantastic mustache.
Well, there's also
So
something about facial hair that obscures. right? Like Shiloh used to have a really big beard, and it was much harder to read his face when he had the beard.
Yeah, and that's actually something a friend of mine pointed out, and it's why for a long time I trimmed, and why I actually now I trim my mustache a lot more. I used to, for a while I was going for a Nietzsche walrus mustache thing, but a friend of mine pointed out when we were learning physiognomy together, he said, I kind of pulled my mustache out, and he said, "You look a lot less cynical now that I can see your upper lip." What does the upper lip mean? Well, in face reading, the upper lip indicates communication and relation with the outside world and other people. Lips stand for communication. Your mouth, as a whole, is about communication and appetites because a lot of these are based on their function, like biologically. So eyes tell us about perception, like I mentioned. Nose is sort of general disposition because what is the nose? Well, the nose breathes, and so breath animates the whole life. Every culture's word for spirit or soul is some variant of breath or wind. You'll find. So Greek, it's pneuma, which is from pneumatic, having to do with air. Hebrew is nephesh, which means breath, ruch, which means wind, soul and spirit, respectively. So there's something about the power of breath being involved with the human action. Because if you stop breathing, you die, and everything you do, that's why they talk about aerobic exercise, because it all involves breath. And there's something else about the nose being the most forward-facing part of your face. It's like how you present yourself. There's something genetic or psychological going on with that. Anyways, lips are about communication. Upper lip, other people, outer world. Lower lip, yourself. So, Stasia, you have both of your lips are pretty full, I would say. Especially, and this is where phenotype and race comes in, because you have to judge relative to that. So if you were of African descent, I would say you have like medium or even kind of thin lips. If they were just like those same lips, but you were, African American. But since you're like that kind of Northern European descent, I would say that they're quite full. And that shows that you're a pretty open communicator with both other people, and you've got a pretty strong sense of self, pretty open line of communication with your own inner world of thoughts, feelings, morals, and desires. Shiloh has thinner lips, and he has a more thoroughly kind of like Scandinavian phenotype. And there is an interesting tie in here where you do see this somewhat with like the average, not every individual, of course, but like kind of the mean of a culture. When you look at Scandinavians and they've got like Shiloh, maybe kind of pivot here a bit, deep set eyes. Deep set eyes indicate that someone is very calculating, they're withdrawn, they think before they speak. Protruding eyes, that means, I always go to Rodney Dangerfield. He has the big eyes like that. Yeah, a lot of comedians have that because those people, they speak off the cuff and they want to speak and be heard and be involved that way. But deep set eyes, they're very calculating. They're thinking before they speak, very cautious, kind of socially. But then he's got thinner lips too, and that means he's less expressive. Not necessarily that he's quiet or that he's deceptive, but that the trust needs to be earned with both other people and his own sense of self. So someone with a really full lower lip, they're going to be in their feelings deep. They're going to be heavy in their own feelings. Sometimes, so if you see someone with a very thin upper lip but full lower lip, you'll know they're feeling a ton. They're not expressing it all. Even if they're talking a ton, you're probably not getting what they're really feeling. They're going to be hiding a lot. That's why most people have a fuller lower lip, thinner upper lip, because most people are, they're more in touch with themselves than they are comfortable expressing it to others. Y'all actually both have kind of, I think, roughly even upper and lower lips, which is probably, I'm pretty good for podcasters. I think pretty balanced communication and insight. Now I'm a freak, actually. I'm a mutant because I have a very thin lower lip and a fuller upper lip. I've seen very few people like this. So this means I'm actually out of touch. And this is the weird thing doing my own physiognomy is like I would learn about the trait, identify it on myself, read about the meaning, and be like, oh yeah, that's me. Or even stuff where it's like, I never thought about it in those terms, but that's true. Like that's what's going on with my mind. One reason for that, why I might not have been able to identify this before, is because I have a thin lower lip. That doesn't cause it. I always like to say it shows it, because it's not. I don't believe it's so much that the facial features causing this. It's an indicator. And we talk somewhat about the potential two-way street, but generally I like to say it's external indicator of internal factors. So that lower lip is an indicator that I'm out of touch with my sense of self. Um, I do have a weak sense of self. Actually, I was talking to my priest about this the other night. I wasn't in confessional or anything. It was just a Wednesday night study, and I kind of offhandedly mentioned a priest he knew who goes into a British accent when he preaches. We're Anglicans, so it kind of makes sense, I guess. But I told him I fall into similar stuff. Like if I spend like an hour watching like a British guy watch on YouTube talk about a movie review, I'll catch myself doing a British accent with people at the gas station and stuff. I'll cringe about it, but it's I'm kind of a social sponge, and I think that's because the upper lip is larger than the lower lip for me, and that's an indicator that I'm super open with other people. I'm an open book generally, and I don't hold back. I've been accused of having no filter a lot. It's probably true, for good or ill. I think it's gotten better over time. I used to just be, blurt things out kind of guy, very much so. But I think with y'all, it's pretty well balanced, which is a good sign there. And like I was saying, Shiloh, you got those deep set eyes, pretty narrow, pretty discerning. You also have wide splaters, not as much as Stasia. Your beautiful ears that you should not be ashamed of. They are, you guys, I would say both have wide splayed ears. That stands for independence, which is this whole thing, right? You guys are going against the grain, against the norm. Her more so than you, I think, actually. She's seems much more independent. I would actually expect you to have some trouble in with relationships, like not necessarily anything super dramatic, but just like maintaining stuff. Because I've got the wide splayed ears, and there's a degree of contrarianism you find there, where it's like, this thing is popular, it's bad, I don't like it. Especially,
it's really interesting that you say that, because I think I have that impulse more strongly than Shiloh does.
yeah. Well, there you go, because your ears are more wide splayed, and
Can you restate it?
Well, I think that there's often I have a very strong sense that if something is popular, it's bad.
Hmm.
And I don't think that you have that quite to such a strong degree.
Hmm.
Like, you and I are always talking about the sort of the artifice of what's presented in the world, where anything that you see on television or in media or on the internet, like, my immediate reaction is like, once something has become popular, that there's something that needs to be reacted against in it. And so this is a constant thing.
Oh yeah, I knew it. And well, because it's doubly so, because not only do you have some of the widest splayed ears I've ever seen. I'm saying this with so much love, and I'm sorry. I
No,
know
they're huge.
ladies.
They're huge. This is why I wear my hair down. One time I wore them up for a podcast, and somebody was like, "What the hell's wrong with your ears?" And I was like,
people are so cruel, especially to women.
"Well, no, it's true. They're huge. Like, you can't. You just." I never grew into them.
Like, full disclosure, when we started this podcast, we used we built these huge monster puppets that we used because we didn't want to subject ourselves to having our actual faces on the internet, and yeah. So we are accepted. We're welcoming all sorts of criticism at this point.
Nice.
Doesn't hurt our feelings.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm so aware as a husband and a father of a daughter of like and like, yeah, I see this on TikTok. Like I haven't done some in a while, like regularly, because I've been so busy with clients and YouTube videos and stuff, which is more my passion. But TikTok's mostly female, so you see a lot of that perspective on there, stuff about plastic surgery and these you mentioned the incels and the insane beauty standards. They're now being applied to men too. Men are getting a taste of that too, that women have been having to deal with since the dawn of time. And I'm, ironically, for being the judge a book by its cover, physiognomon, judging the body time, I try to put a big emphasis on body positivity, like genuine, full spectrum body positivity, where it's like, and I found that, like, I've had clients tell me this does help them with it, because it's not just, oh well, there's the norm, there's like the correct way to look, and then you're different from it, which means you're bad. It's like, no, there's it's such a big world, and human society is so complex. We need all sorts of different kinds of people. In
That's what's
economy
crazy as
is
I'm listening to you about all this. It's like you definitely are pointing out things that I also recognize about myself too. Like but they're not necessarily things like I want to change necessarily either. Like even though I
yeah,
recognize there's sort of limitations in some sense, like I don't want to scare people with the way I look. But at the same time, like I do want to be discerning and I do really want to focus and like so it's
and that's why
it's
it
an
scares
interesting thing to
people,
yeah, I know. Well, right. So it's like
because
it
people
make
can
yeah.
assess that they're being judged. They can tell that they're being judged and assessed, but that's a strength. And if you didn't have that, then you would be this kind of passive, do nothing sort of guy, and you probably wouldn't have this podcast, might not have an academic career. And
Probably
that's what
have a
I'm
lot
always
more
trying to point
friends,
out to
so
people. Yeah. I'm trying to point, like, with the nose. The nose thing kills me, right? Because you've got these, Italian, Armenian, Jewish girls with beautiful long nose, and they want to get it chopped up to be a little Disney princess. No, no, no,
Mm.
no, no. And I don't want to diss the short nose because my wife has an adorable little, European button nose, and it looks great on her. Everyone looks great, right? And it's more deeply than that, right? Because that's kind of just can come across, that sort of shallow body positivity can come across just like feel good BS, right? You're just BSing me. But it's also just that it's like it has a meaning, and you have different strengths and weaknesses that are shown by your face. And so if you didn't have your face, you would not be you. This is tying it back into American Gnostic culture. People say America is a Christian nation. I ain't seeing it. Like, it's got some Christians in it, but the fundamental character, it's this weird, deeply heretical kind of thing. If you get into the biblical stuff and the church fathers and the ancient doctrines, you find that the presuppositions of American culture are in deep conflict with any sort of genuinely Christian notion in a lot of ways. There are some things where it's like there's a cultural Christian element, the historical heritage, that's a separate thing. But the separation of the soul and the body, this Gnostic, almost Hindu leaning sort of idea. And it comes to that too, where it's like, well, I want to be different. I perceive my soul to be this other way. I misdiagnose my soul, and I think my body's in conflict with that. Or rather, people are sort of deluded into think there's no connection, there's no correlation. And so, well, I want to chop up my body to be more like how I feel. It's like, no, your body and your soul are made for each other. Either perspective, right? If you're a Christian or believer of any sort, then it's like God made your soul and body for each other. And
Well, and
then
it,
if
it
you're
just makes a
if you're
lot more,
secular,
yeah.
it's genes. So
But I think that it just makes a lot more sense to have the ability to read a personality and to say that to some degree personality is malleable. Like
Mhm.
if you come across as aggressive in the face and you don't want to be, and that's reflective of something that's happening inside of you, it seems easier to deal with, okay, well, how do I become less aggressive as a person? And assume that
Exactly.
those
It's
features will follow as opposed to treat it as this superficial thing that somehow like doesn't fit. Does that
exactly. And that's why I try to push like personality development as the positive thing. Which people aren't gonna like because that's gonna put the plastic surgeons out of the job if everyone believed that. And there's still like reconstructive stuff. Like, I've got a great family friend who's a plastic surgeon, and he's a wonderful guy and he does great work. Um, but yeah, I think there's I try very hard to push back against the body negativity, the extreme beauty culture that women of all ages, but especially young women, are being subjected to. And now, like I said, the young men too, where the young men are being told like your canthal tilt isn't strong enough. No one's ever going to love you unless you have this giant jaw, and they get into these horribly mentally and even physically unhealthy uh, cycles, and that's a big concern of mine, and that's one of the driving ethoses of my whole project. Is the core is like helping people to know themselves and understand why they are the way they are. Like with you, like, oh, I got big ears. As by default, you're just gonna be like, well, I've got big ears. You say I never grew into them. Well, what really is going on is you never grew out of them, and because
it's true.
children generally have wide ears. Children are independent. They have a sense of wonderment. They want to learn everything. Most people, their ears kind of slick on back as they grow up and become conformist, boring adults. I try to, and it's cliche to say. I'm trying to say it in a way that doesn't sound like TED Talk level cringe, but I do like to keep a level of childlike wonderment and play to things. I think. Well, I think that's important. I think you look at any great genius, any great accomplishment. Not to say that's me or anything, but all the greats, and they had that. They weren't these, you know, beer swigging, football watching Gen Xers, not taking shots at my dad or anyone else's dad. It's like everyone's dad I knew growing up. But these guys were like, whatever, a bunch of nonsense. Just to sit and watch football. That's it. Uh, so I try to keep sort of a level of, and I think something this eccentric, you got to kind of have that level of independence. I mean, we've all three got the decently wide splayed ears at least, and I think that's one example of like that's the trait, that's the indicator rather of the trait that makes something like this conversation possible at all.
I mean, it is pretty wild to think that there would be a correlation between physical features and nature, and yet it seems on its face obvious too, where
Yeah, there,
it's a thing that you encounter all the time, just in minute ways. Everybody notices it, but I think that we started the conversation by talking about how weird it is that we've kind of come to treat these things as being something that shouldn't really be paid attention to because it's superficial and it's not actually revealing anything of some kind of internal character.
Don't
But
judge a book by its cover.
yeah, and so for me, I think that the wildest thing is just how this is slowly starting to become accepted because you're seeing these studies about, AI is able to pick out political affiliation, it's able to notice mental illness. There's all of these different things that when you actually feed faces into a machine and you tell it, you know, this is the spectrum of symptoms relative to the spectrum of faces, what do you see? All of a sudden it starts to spit stuff out. And I'm like, that's
mhm.
pretty weird. If it wasn't real, probably shouldn't be able to find it using machine learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I think about a lot. That even happens with people. So people, we start off talking about the intuitive impression. Well, people tend to have the same intuitive impression of people. It's not random. Like if there was nothing to it, you think it would just be random. Like we would all look at the same person. I'd be like, oh, he looks really mean. You're like, oh, no, actually, he looks really nice. Oh, he looks really smart. He looks really dumb. No, it's like people have the same impressions about other people. And so that's weird right off the bat. If there's nothing to this, that should be the case. And like you said with the AI stuff, it's political orientation, it's religiosity, it's sexual orientation, and they get it pretty accurately. And so I think it's pretty much undeniable here that there's something to this. The barrier is ideological. We're kind of in, not to get too grim, but America is having its late Soviet moment. We've got continual chains of senile geriatric uh, premiers, supreme leaders, um, where we're printing way too much money. No one believes in the state mythology of the regime anymore, and if you do, you're a huge dork. But the institutions are fully sclerotic; they're ossified, and so this is like trying to. This is
Well,
sort of like
there's a moment of like communal insanity, right? Because this is
hmm
something that my parents talked about in the Soviet Union because they watched it fall apart and they were like, you could see that it was collapsing, and yet no one was really able to point to it or talk about it or even acknowledge it. And I think
hmm
that that's kind of what you're pointing
The
to.
myth collapsing, is that what you mean?
Well, there was a series after Perestroika. There was like all of these premieres that were just like totally obvious patsies. Like they had lost the mythological quality of this nobility of leadership, and they were drunks, they were patsies, they
Mm-hmm.
were
hmm
idiots, they were fools on television, and everybody was watching it and they were seeing it. But it's one of those things that what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah.
There's nothing that can be done. You're kind of just sitting there grabbing onto the arms of your chair, hoping that when the roller coaster does finally go down the hill, that you're not gonna be launched
Which
out
is
into
literally the
chaos.
conversation I have whenever I talk to any of my friends on the phone about this kind of stuff, like what's happening in the country and the world, and like it always ends in like, well, shit, what are you gonna do about it? Like, just
Well,
hang on.
what do you do? And that's what you say. You say you hang on. What is hanging on? What's the roller? Let's keep that analogy again. What's the roller coaster safety bar in a collapsing society? Because we have actually, people always like to talk about the fall of Rome. Well, we actually have, America's similar in a lot of ways to the Roman Republic. You get into Spengler and you see a lot of that. It's also very similar to the Soviet Union, founded around the same time. Oh, specifically, not the United States, but the government of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New Deal regime. We had our third or fourth constitution, depending on your numbering system, if you count the Articles of Confederation. We had we're if we talk like the French do, we're in our fourth republic, and it's nearing the end. This is the Strauss-Howe generational theory. It goes about the length of a human life, and we've kind of paralleled the Soviet Union. We were, with the Cold War, literally, there were parallels. They were mirror images of each other. And I think a similar thing is happening where, like, okay, globalism is set up, the world is interconnected, and the age of the superpower had its moment of like getting us to globalism, to a one world society, for better for worse. I think that ship has sailed. We're not going back to Westphalian nation states, or everyone's going to stay in their own little country. The world's interconnected. We're done. It's baked in now. So the age of the superpower is on its way out, and it's becoming increasingly clear that, like, okay, like the 20th century America, especially that late 20th century thing where it's like, oh, America runs the whole world. That doesn't have lasting power. That's on its way out. And I pointed out to some friends recently that it feels like we're living in a pre-collapsed society, in that you think about Mad Max and stuff, and the idea is that the economy collapses, then the government collapses, then society collapses. The material stuff goes away, and then people go crazy. It feels like to me that people got ahead of the curve on that, and they went ahead and went crazy before the economy or the government collapsed. So we have all of the material signifiers of a functioning society. On paper, we have good GDP. We have a strong military that can't beat a bunch of Yemenis with bottle rockets, right? Trump said, we're going to take them out, threw some bombs at them, couldn't take them out. He's like, we won, and they're still shooting down ships and launching missiles.
But maybe what that really is that that's more of a readout of how false the narrative is. Because that was another thing that happened in the Soviet Union, where they would tell you things on television, that everything was good and everything was fine, but then you'd look around and you'd realize that it definitely wasn't. Like, I was born in Chechnya, and so like the year after we left, the full-on war started, and so like the city that I was born in is Grozny. Grozny was leveled by the Russians. Now it's more or less rebuilt, but there was probably like, I don't know, maybe 10 years where it was just rubble. And on television, everything was fine. And then 6 months after we left, one of our family friends was taking her baby for a walk in front of the presidential palace. And an hour after she was there, the leader of the Communist Party was thrown out of the window by the separatists to his death on the plaza. And it's like, the television's not telling you that. And yet everybody on the ground, because I always ask my parents, I'm like, how did you know to leave? We were historically Russian. Like, everybody had been Russian for generations. And so, and when they left thinking that they'd never see anyone that they knew ever again. Because the way that you leave the Soviet Union is you go on the other side of the Iron Curtain, you're never coming back, you can't call across the border, maybe occasionally you can send a letter or something, but yet there was all of these, they left. And I was like, how? Were you the first? And my dad was like, no, everybody was leaving. Like, there was just this thing where you just started noticing that people started to vanish. Like, they talked about it for a long time. The news was saying that everything was fine, and then people just started to figure out how to get out, and so places were emptying out. And so I wonder if that isn't what's happening here too, which is that the news says everything is fine, and then you talk to the people, and everybody's like, peanut butter is twice what it was a year ago. Like, something's weird.
I've got computer science friends. None of them can find a job, and first off, fascinating story. I love that because you're ethnically Russian, but from Chechnya. So
Yeah, like I
here,
mean, the Soviet Union was they would you got your degree and then they would like send you somewhere after you finished.
mm,
They would basically say like because you're a top student, this is where you would go. But it for some reason like my dad was from Kazakhstan and so they ended up in Chechnya
mm,
because after my mom graduated, even though she was like top of her class, she was like, "No, you can give me a shitty post," and so they sent her to Chechnya.
interesting. But yeah, well, I think that's very much true. And so, what does to kind of draw it back in? What does what does escaping the Iron Curtain look like for us? What does to draw it into kind of Chechnya? What does secession look like in practice? Um, and I think it looks like because we're in a pre-collapse society, right? The government and economy, they're still kind of there, but they're obviously crumbling. Like they aren't what they used to be. But at least on paper, the facade is still there. But the social structures aren't. They fully collapse. Where it's like dating is a disaster, religion it out. But all the things that make human society work are in shambles. I would say they're already demolished. There was a demolition process from the 60s through now, and I think it's pretty much done. And what has that resulted in? Well, it's resulted in a complete lack of trust. That's also due to just government betraying people, right? Like the disaster that was the COVID lockdowns, that made people lose trust in science because they were like, do this because the science says so. That's a very Soviet thing, right? COVID was America's Chernobyl. It was the disaster that let everyone know that there's no one at the wheel and you cannot trust the scientists. And now what do you get? Well, now
Well, the
you get,
wheel's been bought. I guess that's what everybody learned. They're like
yeah,
the
yeah.
wheel's for sale to the highest corporate
The
bidder,
wheels for sale to the
essentially.
highest bidder. The science doesn't mean anything. And now what do you have? Well, you got people believe the Earth is flat. It's not even that people are going medieval; they're going pre-ancient Greek. They're going like caveman levels of like Earth flat because look flat. Like the Greeks knew the Earth was round, but people are going flat Earth not because they're stupid, but because they just are so burnt out that they don't trust a word that comes out of the government. So the government tells them that up is up. They're like, no, screw you, up is down. Um,
That's
because it's
absolutely
just
right.
the lack of trust has gone that far. So what do you do in this situation? We're swirling around in a chaotic nebula of nothing. And this is sort of a big tangential conversation that does tie back into what I'm doing and what y'all are doing, which is that what do nebula do? And the flat earthers, I've mentioned them, they won't like this because they disagree with this. They think this is baloney because they don't believe in gravity. But um, nebulas, after a supernova, it's all scattered out. Well, the dust. One of you guys, you're an astrophysicist, right? Shiloh?
You're wandering into delicate territory.
Okay.
We have complex
Okay,
opinions
imagine
about
that
all these
I'm an idiot.
formation processes.
Yeah, imagine that I'm a moron who doesn't know anything about space other than what I've seen on Star Trek. From what I know, stars the dust coalesces into stars. Probably, right? Am I?
Let's throw some condensation reactions in there, but yes, you're on the right track. Stars come from other stuff, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So it recoalesces into stars. So right now we're in nebula phase. And what we've got to do is we've got to start recoalescing. This is called social capital. That's the key phrase for rebuilding American society. Because it's not the government's asleep at the wheel or the wheel is for sale, as you said. I think that's a great way of putting it. The economy is fake. And so it's like, honest, Stasia, what you were saying about Russia. It's like you've got Yeltsin up there and he's drunk in front of Bill Clinton. And it's like, okay, everything on the TV is fake, right? And this is all a bunch of baloney. So what do you do then? You just take matters into your own hands. So you say, okay, the scientific consensus is BS. Well, I'll just get on the ground, pull up my sleeves, and do my own research, and start building a new scientific consensus. The academia is kicking out all of not allowing the actually impactful voices to speak. That's where y'all come in. Y'all feature all these people way smarter and more qualified than me, right? I go through your video list and it's like doctor, PhD. I'm like, whoa, I am out of my league here, but I appreciate the opportunity. It's great. And this is at every level. So like when I mentioned Jonathan Pajot, and the internet enables all this in a way that's never been possible before. And that's why the internet is such possibly the most important thing since the printing press. I wouldn't say possible. I would say yes. the most important invention since the printing press, because like with Jonathan Mageau, religion is under attack. Religion, like no one believes in it anymore. Well, what if you just have one guy who explains, hey, all these symbols and stuff, they have meaning, and here's how you spiritually reconnect, and there's one of those guys for a bunch of those guys for all the different religions and even new spiritual stuff, new paradigms of thinking about religion. And so that's the big picture, because I'm choleric. I've got the high, big, giant, enormous forehead from my father, and you're getting self-conscious now, Shiloh. I can see.
I got a bigger forehead than you, my friend. But
You do. That's very impressive, very powerful.
I had it behind all this.
Well, that's why you
main
can
stuff.
understand condensation reactions and I can't, because it's that extra half inch that you've got on
Well,
me.
the rest of the astrophysicists can't either. If it makes you feel any better, that's a bit of a fringe theory that I think will be a scientific revolution soon. But yeah, the standard story is like stars collapse because of gravity, but that makes no goddamn sense at all. So
it doesn't. I that's why I brought that up. Actually, it was on my mind because I watched an interview with a flat earther and he mentioned that, and I was like, yeah, that actually does make no sense. What the heck?
It's a little more complex than that, but you have to rethink about. You really have to start rethinking what stars are, and then a lot of the really fun toys in astrophysics start to go out the window. Your black holes and white dwarfs and stuff. They stop making sense, and yeah, it's kind of funny, man. Because like I never wanted to be this guy who was contradict. I hate conflict. Like I hate like breaking people's hearts. I hate. Like even just this, like when you started talking about stars, like there's this feeling that I get where I'm just like, oh god damn it, like because I don't really enjoy being. I really don't. Nazia's looking at me. She's like, you love it. I'm like, no, I've just found myself in this position for some reason, where I kind of put some different things together, and I tried to find all the experts in the world to talk me out of it, but they just repeatedly fail to do so. There are some incredible minds who have great ideas out there, but.
I just want to say that as we started talking about the fact that everything is collapsing, there was a big car crash right outside of our house.
Oh, are you serious?
Oh my gosh!
Didn't you hear that giant bang?
Is that what that was?
Yeah.
I thought that was just like a door like a UPS truck or something.
No, it's straight up.
well,
There's like.
Is everybody okay?
I don't know. There's like chaos happening outside the windows.
Looks okay.
But I think that there's something that happens, which is that there are problems that you see and you have to figure out how to address them. And there's a deep frustration when that mantle falls on you as a person. Because on some level, what we want is we want to be able to go through the world and live in a functioning society where the responsibility of making the society functional falls on somebody else. Because you don't really want to be the one who's digging the ditches to make sure that it works. But I think,
or at the bare minimum, you all want to be on the same page about which direction's up or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so as all this trust
social creatures,
erodes,
we want belonging and meaning. Let me ask you guys. Let me butt in here. You're both millennials, mid-30s, right? Anastasia, early 20s. What?
Nastia is younger than me.
I'm almost 40.
You are not.
I am
Shut
too.
up.
I'm turning 37.
I'm
next
almost
year.
80, I guess, by the same definition. Yeah.
But you guys,
Yeah, I'm 40. I'm 43.
Yeah, 30. I guess 36 for now.
Cusper. You born in 82, Shiloh?
That's right.
Ah,
Good math.
first wave millennial, just like my mother-in-law. All right. So you guys are both millennials to bring it into one of my other favorite theory other than physiognomy. It's actually my main one that I think about that influences my whole thinking, because I was talking about long-term thinking. Like nothing I do is, I'll let you in on my little secret. Nothing I do is just like for its immediate purpose. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do face reading because that'll be a neat job to pay the bills, or that's neat in and of itself. Like that's part of it. But everything that I've set up, it's like the Bene Gesserit in Dune. My plans are measured in centuries. Not to be like insane or have delusions of grandeur or anything.
No, I feel you 100%.
Yeah, well, I can see that with you guys, where it's like it's not just like, oh, it'd be cool to have a podcast. That'd be kind of fun. It's like there's obviously a vision. That's what I admire so much about you guys. It's like there's a vision and a social end. Now, you guys ever heard of Strauss-Howe generational theory?
Mm-mm.
My friends watching this are rolling their eyes because this is my thing. This is my special interest. So 1991. It's actually the book I have my computer rested on to frame my webcam correctly. Generations. And so these two guys, Neil Howe, William Strauss. William Strauss was a political satirist. Neil Howe was a demographer, historian. They got together. They were baby boomers, and they were like, there was such a crazy gap between us and our parents' generation. I wonder if anyone else felt this in American history. So they went through American history and they found all the references from like the from the Puritans to now, to then, I guess, in 91, of every time anyone talked about this generation, the new generation. And what they find is that you get a new generation roughly every 20 years or so, about the length of a phase of life, right? So you have youth and coming of age, young adulthood, middle age, elderhood. Roughly, you average them out, and they're about 22 years. Phases of life can dilate or contract depending on social factors. Like it takes longer to reach adulthood or less time. So they identified these generations over time, and they found that they fit a cycle. So like there will be a generation of narcissistic spiritualists, and then every time after them, there will be a generation of burnt out reactionaries and cynical individualists. You think boomer X are dynamic. Well, that happened before. And they managed to time it up. They were like, oh, the spiritualist generation comes of age during every one of America's great awakenings, which we already have numbered, first, second, and third great awakening. And they come at these roughly 80-year intervals, roughly the length of one human life. So, first great awakening, long human life, second great awakening, long human life, third great awakening, long human life, 60s and 70s, when you get this huge spiritual explosion and the new age stuff. And they found that it happened with what they call secular crises too. The same about 80-year span you get between, American Revolution to Civil War to World War II. You can actually go before the American Revolution too. You go about 80 years back. It's the Glorious Revolution, which was in both England and the colonies. People forget about it now, but it was very important in the day for the Protestant versus Catholic thing going on. And right now, we're about that length of time from World War II. And what happens in these times? Well, institutions are rotten, they're gutted out, they're irrelevant, and they need to be reforged, sometimes by government action if there's enough left over to work with. So that's what Lincoln and FDR were doing. They're like, okay, we got to reorient this thing. Lincoln's like, we got to be more federal. FDR is like, we got to embrace a global role, make a big welfare state. Sometimes if things are too rotten or the differences are too great, you got to just start from the ground up. So sometimes in history, it's called upon a few kind of randomly chosen delegates, a motley assortment of planters and lawyers and doctors and shopkeepers from, these 13 little colonies to come together and write out a list of grievances and be like, we're done. And it's a lot of times it's an accident of history. A lot of times it's just individual vision and having the courage to go through with it. And so you have these cycles, you have these periods of history, and you have these generational archetypes that are living through it. They're defined by their historical experience, kind of what they lacked collectively in childhood. That creates a generational personality. Now, in Strauss-Howe terms, we would all be millennials. They actually coined the term millennial. It comes from them, from that book from 1991. And because they say it started with the class of 2000, the 82 births. And then they have it extending about 22 years from that to like 2005, roughly. They call that a hero generation or a civic generation. This is like the World War II vets, the greatest generation. This is like Jefferson and Hamilton. These people are the people who are called on by the flow of history. I'm a Hegelian, so I believe in like historical dialectic, that there's like the mind of God, the zeitgeist sort of drawing history towards certain ends. And I see very much that we have that dynamic playing out again, where it's this generation of young adults, these people who they're smart, they're driven, they're optimistic, they're small p progressive, they have big dreams for the future, great spirit, but they're locked out of the system because the institutions are out of date. The economy is not working for them, the government's not working for them. And so it's up to them to rebuild the institutions. And it's hard work, it's tough work. And because of this, youth experience actually drives them to have lifelong collective personality differences. So you look at someone like Ronald Reagan, Bush Sr., these guys were from that World War II generation, and they were, love them or hate them, they were workers up until their old age. I mean, they were really hard workers in government, and they really believed in it. Why? Because they built the institutions, they bled for them. So all that to say, everything we're doing here, it has a bigger meaning, it has a bigger picture. Physiognomy is a neat thing, and I do think it has genuine value. That's why I do it. It's not just because it's a neat party trick. People will pay me money for it. It's because I'm helping people, generally my age, to know themselves. One of my biggest customer subsets. I've done my own sort of market research when setting this up, and I've identified a few different archetypes. The hustlers, who are like entrepreneurs, guys wanting to start their own business. The romantics, who are wanting to learn about compatibility. I get a lot of ladies buying packages for their boyfriends or husbands as a birthday gift. It's super cute. I love doing a couples package. You guys have good compatibility, by the way, and lots of. Are you guys an item?
Yeah, we've been together for 13 years now.
Okay, that was like obvious, but I realized after I said that it was never like explicit. Like you were never like my partner, Anastasia.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
we're
didn't
married.
want to.
Yeah.
Okay, you're married.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you guys are in the Pacific Northwest. Y'all a bunch of heathens up there. I don't know if y'all even know what a marriage is. Well, matrimony.
It's
Y'all seem cool.
it's very traditional where you live, my friend.
What part of Oregon are you from?
It would pass as the South where we live.
Are you guys in like the Inland Empire area up there?
We're in the Rogue Valley, but it is a very old world, like Oregon Trail level people, and
So is it like Eastern Oregon?
it's probably similar in culture, but no, it's actually on the backside of the mountains here, the coastal range.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're west of Klamath. Klamath Falls is Eastern Oregon,
okay.
and so like all of the Burns, Malheur, like you probably remember like the Bundys.
Mm-hmm.
They're northeast of us by probably 150 miles, but that's sort of like ranching culture bleeds into this area. It's offset because there's a small college town that's where they have the big West Coast Shakespeare Festival.
And
so that kind of
SOU where you guys are at?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Neat. Okay.
But yeah, most of the culture is very traditional, and it's like loggers and ranchers and salted
right.
people.
Because I hear that from guys in BC, up in Canada, in that area. They're like, listen, you drive out of Vancouver, you start seeing Confederate flags.
Yeah, there's
we
actually
had one on our street for a while.
Two
for
a while.
There you go.
One
My
of them got
school
taken
was
down.
right across from a Confederate flag. The rest was surrounded by cotton fields.
I feel like
very Alabama upbringing.
Maybe somebody finally told the guy that they lost the war. I don't know.
Yeah, it's.
But yeah, the all that to say, yeah, y'all are doing that, and but my thing, I do it because it helps people. Like when the biggest reward for me is not when a guy buys the big $300 package. The big reward for me is when I'm done with it and someone tells me, hey, your advice really helped me at work. Hey, your advice really helped me with my relationship. Like, that's what matters to me. And that's not like a self-granted, like part of that is that's not me by nature. By nature, I'm a very selfish, exploitative person. Part of that is Holy Spirit stuff. I do think it has a transformative power for me in my life. But part of that impulse to help others is a generational characteristic of our greater generation. The millennials and Zoomers, we share that trait where we want to help each other out. We want to build a big society because that's what we're lacking. The boomers had that taken for granted. So what they were lacking was this sort of spiritual richness, this individualism, this inner life. All they had was Beaver Cleaver and Andy Griffin. It was all sort of black and white, grayscale, sort of boring stuff. We're the opposite. We're fine in our inner lives. We're fine kind of religiously. Maybe romance we're kind of missing out, especially the younger guys. But the institutions are what's lacking. And so all that to say that we're at this inflection point in history. And I think you look at the generational historical timing, we've maybe got 10 more years or so of this, I'd say probably at most, of this crisis era that we've been in since 2008. That was our Black September, Black Tuesday moment. Was 2008, and since then we've been in a crisis era. Things have been ramping up. Every previous crisis era has ended in a full-blown war. World War, Civil War, Revolutionary War. It's possible that this one doesn't end that way, theoretically, but there's no precedent. So the young people, they get called to be the foot soldiers in this war, but the more important role is in institution building. So you think of, even in entertainment, the last civic generation, the GI generation, who were their entertainers? It was Walt Disney. It was institution builders, people who, they didn't want to just make, oh, I'll make a neat cartoon. It's like, I want to build an empire to bring everyone together. That's Disney's passion was Epcot. It was Tomorrowland. It was this utopian vision. Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek. He had an ideological commitment to no one having interpersonal conflict on Star Trek, which ended up making it kind of boring in the, when you get into Next Generation, the first seasons, you have these boomer writers who were chafing under that. But he was like, no, in the future, everyone gets along. And part of that was that he lived through the Great Depression. He lived as a young man during the Great Depression and seeing all the institutions falling apart, seeing the world go to hell. And so he was driven to this thing of we've got to work together. We've got to be optimistic. And you're seeing that coming now, where in the face of increasing censorship, lies, delusion, falsehood, doubt, there's a new consensus forming, I think, really strongly among the young people. The Gen Z people, they're crazy, and there's a strong streak of nihilism among my peers that I find really concerning. But there's a strong solidarity there. And the key is to guide that, is to make institutions, to get those voices out there that guide it to something good. Because that can go bad, right? Solidarity can turn into fascism or communism. You look at that Luigi Mangione kid, and there was big solidarity from my like-aged peers around supporting that guy, which is not a direction you want to be going if you know about how history works. The killings never stop with the guy you don't like. It ends up with going to you.
Yeah, it's like Robespierre gets guillotined.
Exactly. That's a good exact example I was thinking of. You're smart. You know your stuff.
I think that one of the biggest challenges in this project of rebuilding these institutions is the physical placehood of them historically versus now. You mentioned the optimism about, we have the internet, we have the podcast spaces, but we also have to remember that the internet can be controlled really easily too. And the visibility of ideas can be suppressed really easily without people even realizing it. Right. And so what's happening in terms of who has the biggest microphones isn't necessarily who has the best ideas, although it can't, ideally it would be that way. We just don't, we find out about things like the Twitter files. Obviously, that same kind of crap is probably happening on every single one of these social platforms, including YouTube. We don't have the smoking guns of it, but it would be insane if it wasn't. It would just be unimaginable. So I do worry about how we find placehood for our institutions, like how we actually have in-person interactions where we can actually build that kind of camaraderie. Because I don't think that there's, this Zoom meeting is great, but I wish to God you were here in the room with me right now. It would be so much better, right? And we could go have dinner afterwards, and we could hang out and probably build a lot more than we're building in just this 3-hour podcast that we're doing.
And that's what you do. You get the seed. The other night, Wednesday night service was about the Bible study was about the resurrection. And St. Paul talks about resurrection is like a seed is buried and something grows from it. You can think of the internet like the seed, like all the stuff we're doing now. This is the seed. Then I very much believe in the in-person stuff. I've got friends they're great at in-person get-togethers. I'm actually going to this next week. I'm going to Vid Summit in Dallas. The lectures will be fine, right? They're a guy to talk about how to do a thumbnail, how to do this, that. I'm there to meet people. I'm there to in-person, networking always sounds so cynical and self-interested, but to meet folks.
You want to make friends, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And get to know people and be like, hey, what's up? I'm the face reading guy. I've accepted that now. That's how I'm introduced to people. That when people, oh, Nate told me about you're the face reading guy, right? I guess so. Right. You eventually, I was always the guy, wide splayed ears. Stassi, you're the same way. Don't put me in a box. Eventually you find a box that's comfy. It's kind of like being a cat, you know. Eventually you find a box that's comfortable enough you can sit. Like, okay,
You make your own
Um,
box.
make your own box. There you go. We're human beings. We're generative. We can produce. But yeah, placehood. That's the next step. The social.
We
You
did a
know, kind of
conference too. Like I think that is like that's definitely we've done 2 conferences now.
nice.
I think that's a good start. It seems still insufficient, and maybe this is just stretching the limits of my imagination at this kind of early point in what we're doing here.
But like, look, the reason that a university feels really powerful is because it has a physical location in space.
Yeah.
And when you walk around, everybody is kind of on the same project. And
Exactly.
obviously, at
That's
this point, they're enormous, where you have, state schools. I think I went to UCSD. I think there's like 40,000 people on campus every day. Like, it's enormous. It's basically, it's a city.
I felt the first glimmer of hope this year at the university, actually, because actually I think the university that I teach at has completely bottomed out in terms of the quality of the education that they're offering. But it's also the first time that I've seen, that I've had conversations with deans, that I've had conversations with students that are reflecting back on the conversations they've had with their other professors, with other faculty that I've talked to, where everybody is kind of looking around like, this isn't going to work. We need to change some things massively. And there's actual talk of how that should look. And it's actually kind of swinging back in the direction that you would hope that it would.
That's how history works. That's how the crisis era works. You got it. It's right there because, something Neil Howell always says at his podcast appearances. For a while, I obsessively listened to all his podcast appearances, trying to like suss out more information about like what the future is going to look like. Turns out he says the same thing on every podcast, but it's all right. And I found out he said something where it's like, well, when do we make a change? Is it on a sunny day when everything's all right? You can do anything? No, you make a change when your back's against the wall. This is something I've always realized in history. I was like, you really only have a revolution when people are starving. When crap's too expensive, you're never going to own a home. Your career is a total dead end. You are lied to about everything. No one trusts any of the institutions because human beings are path of least resistance, especially the competent ones. The more competent and socially stable and socially fixed you are, the more you have to lose. And so it's real easy to get the riffraff riled up for a riot, but they don't have the stuff to make a lasting change, a real revolution, not necessarily in the man the barricades sense, but in the sense of a positive transformative one. This is why I focus on building institutions. And you can try to build an alternative institution when things are going fine, and people have done that for a long time throughout the past 50, 80 years. But if the mainstream institutions are good enough, I'll just go there. That's fine. They have to get really bad to, like what you're saying in university, everyone's like, okay, this isn't working. How do we retool it? And that's when a small cadre, people always talk about you only need 3% of a people for a revolution. Well, that's not just people with guns. That works intellectually too. You get the word is cadre. That's like the Bolsheviks, where it's a tiny group of driven people where they're like, we're going to do it this way. And they're such a small group. Bolshevik means majority, but they were really the minority. They just called themselves a majority because it sounded cooler. And what you need one driven, maybe two driven professors with vision who can be the vanguard. That's the other term, cadre and vanguard. I read a lot of revolutionary history because I think it's very salient to our day and age.
You're not beating the Confederate war general allegations.
Well, I have many allegations. I get another one I get is Lenin, which is very maybe prescient. People call me Lenin a bunch. The worst one is people call me Charlie Manson a lot, which I've actually gotten back in high school. It's the same sort of kind of dark sort of look, big forehead. There's one picture of Charles Manson where he looks just like me, where he has short hair. He's in prison. He's doing this.
Yikes.
That one's rough. That one's spooky. I don't like that one that much. But Lenin, Confederate
I'm sure
General.
Charlie Manson was a nice guy when you got to know him.
At some point, I'm sure. I mean,
He had
I think you're driving at something that's really valuable, which is that the arc of the world pivots on a fairly small, dedicated group that has a vision. And I think that this is one of the reasons.
But also, like, everybody can play a little part. Like, you don't have to be that professor that leads the charge at the university necessarily. You could literally just be like having a conversation with another professor or with like a dean or anything, and just kind of be like, yeah, like, it probably is kind of fucked up that we like are losing our chemistry department. And like, don't you think chemistry is going to be an important science in the future? And like, what are we doing? You know, it doesn't. I think everybody can play a pretty important role despite not
Exactly.
being like a titan heroic figure themselves.
There's a vanguard is absolutely necessary. But I actually don't like to say this because I just came up with this, but I'm going to like saying this because I'm definitely going to use this one. Every revolution is made up of 1,000 small acts of courage. Put that out, put that on your wall. I'm not claiming that one. That was delivered to me by God.
But
Now
I
I'm
think
starting to
that
sound like Charles
there's a
Manson.
difference between like we had another conversation recently where we kind of were circling around the difference between a revolution and a renaissance.
Mm-hmm.
And something that we came to is that like the revolution is soaked in blood inherently, but a renaissance is something that is soaked in light. It is this idea of we can move towards something better and we don't have to guillotine everybody.
Exactly.
We can just create the conditions under which things are nurtured. And I think that this is how this ties back to the idea of physiognomy, which is that there are innate characteristics. People have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. And if we can actually map people's strengths and create a world where their strengths allow them to accomplish what they want, perhaps it's possible to get out of the hole that we're in without having to turn towards full crisis, despite the fact that that's how everything's always unfolded in the past.
But I
Yeah.
think you're right, man. Like, it requires a real centering of the value of courage, the virtue of courage. Like, that's something that I feel like has gotten really lost and twisted in the era of safety and feelings and caring, which is like, those are valuable too. But courage is so important. Like, saying the thing that might get you in trouble, but you should say it anyways. That's weird. And there's not been a lot of centering of how important it is. Like, all those 1,000 little tiny acts of courage, that thing like that. Oh, excuse me, sir. Actually see this a little bit differently, like, you know, to your boss or whatever, like, or who in some situation that it could be dangerous, but that value is so important. I really would love to see an age of courage come out of whatever the hell has happened for the last 20 years.
Exactly. And that's sort of to tie it all back to physiognomy and sort of give my final my grand vision, right? I mentioned this physiognomy, Prosopa insights, all this has a goal at the end, a light at the end of the tunnel, which is, and I have whole plans and charts graphed out for like how I tie this in with, but the end goal is always working on institutions. There's a generational drive towards that. I think for collectively and kind of in our collective generational subconscious, we feel that because we see the need for it. And so that's something I think about with using physiognomy for like, vetting people, being able to, make career suggestions for people. That's something I say, like I said, it's the lost, one of my big subsets of customers are the lost boys, I call them, where they are young guys, my age or younger, generally, sometimes older even. And they're like, what do I do with my life, man? And I give them some pointers. I'm like, hey, here are your strengths. Here are your weaknesses. Here's a compatible partner. And that's the stuff that's really rewarding to me because it really helps drive that home. And yeah, I think that's important because it builds up people individually, but that's not enough. You have to build stuff. If you build it, they will come and get people involved in that. And yeah, I think physical space, that's the next step. And this is like a crazy little connection moment, but one of my institutions on like my big chart of like, this is what I want to do with my life. Prosopa is the starting point and it branches off from there. The end point is like an academy, university thing for fringe science. I would call it, I'm going to totally out myself here, put my cards on the table. I would call it Miskatonic University because I'm a huge, do you know what that's referencing?
No.
That's the university in all H.P. Lovecraft's work. It's in Arkham, Massachusetts, which is then the namesake of Arkham Asylum. I would call it that because I'm a huge nerd, but I But
I think
that's
it can be done. I think that's a
Yeah.
really noble goal.
yeah,
I actually think we align with that really well.
and
I knew
that's
a dude one time who was talking about buying up a university, but I don't think he had enough allies in this space. Really. Like he didn't actually have like a university's worth of people to jump on that project with him. He had money. Maybe he was a bit of a grifter
Yeah,
and a
he's
liar,
a
but let's
grifter.
not mention the guy.
but that's an idea a friend of mine has had too, and so I see a lot of alignment going on there, and yeah, I think this is all sort of emphasize, this whole conversation we've been talking about the importance of the body, judging the body. The body's real, the body's important, and I love the internet, and the internet is a great opportunity. The internet plays on a lot of America's Gnostic tendencies that I've again kind of been harping on a lot. I just listened to a great Jonathan Petro podcast about this yesterday about the American religion and Gnostic superstition, um, where the threat of the internet is detachment from the body. It's where you become this digital persona. This is what happens with a lot of the modern kids who get swept into the transgender thing. Is their psyche feels detached from their body, and they're like, "What's going on?" It's like, "I guess I must be a different gender. That's why I feel body dysmorphia or dysphoria or whatever." It's like, well, no, actually, you live your whole life in discord. You're not using your body for anything. That's where your body doesn't feel connected to your soul. There's legitimate cases of gender dysphoria and transgenderism. Of course, it's its own thing. Not to
But there
denigrate
does
that.
seem to be two categories of the phenomenon.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like there's a lot of guys who have just gotten into it, who they spend their whole lives on Discord and in video games, and it's like I think there's something psychological going on there. That's why I'll end, on this note of the importance of physicality, physical space, of knowing yourself and other people, but not in a solipsistic way. Right? I don't want to analyze people and let them know about themselves or let them know about other celebrities so that they can just like use that to their advantage personally. I want to help connect people. I want to help people in relationships. I want to help people to start business. I want to help people to start or revive institutions in a renaissance. And that's I love the distinguishing between renaissance and revolution, where I use the Soviet Union analogy because I don't think there's going to be a bloody revolution. Because the Soviet Union, you had a lot of bloodshed. Obviously, you were from Chechnya, you knew about that. Um, but there was stuff after the fact, but it wasn't a bloody revolution like how the Soviet Union was established. It just fell apart. It collapsed under its own internal contradictions. I kind of ironically use Marxist language against them. And I think we're seeing that in America, right? That's why I say society's pre-collapse, the government, the economy are on their way. Like I said with the roller coaster analogy, what is the guardrail? It's institutions, it's belonging. It is new systems of thought. It's new ideologies, new religious systems, or just revived religious systems that can more people. We're in this chaos. We need something to hold on to. And that can be a podcast. It can be a religion. It can be a relationship or a business enhanced and specialized and narrowed into your best abilities based on your physiognomy or your just personality traits in general. And absolutely, I think the next step, like the consensus is here on the internet, people are hungry for it. Now's the time to build. Now's the time to work your ass off. Stay up till 3, keep staying up till 3 a.m. I'm doing it. Just work, 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 because we're reaching the real inflection point soon. And the people who have stuff to show for it, when that comes, like something that they can call people into, they're going to, prosper probably. But the more important thing is that they're going to get to define that thing. And it's, you see there's an appetite for it. You see on the political side, who's getting a lot of attention, who's getting young guys doing them. It's these people like, you go on the radical right section, you see these Patriot Front guys, right? And they're marching around with the shields and the flag and they're like they're open fascists. Like they have the fascies on it and everything. But young men are drawn to it because it's like they have a physical space there. There's all sorts of groups that you can join on the internet and you guys can role play on there. It's like, we're going to do a revolution. But there is something because, like I'm always saying, the body and the soul are not that separate. The body's important. The physical space is important. Love to meet you guys in person. If this interview wasn't a total disaster, I didn't totally burn my chance for that.
No, for sure, man. If you're
You
ever
can
out on
cut
the
this.
West Coast, remind me where you're at physically?
So I'm in Mississippi,
Mississippi. All
and
right.
you can maybe cut this part out if it's too identifying. But my wife and I live in an RV actually,
Oh, cool.
because we're going to spend the next year or two traveling the country. It's my
Nice.
wife's life dream,
Oh,
and
hell
since
yeah.
I have
Come visit us,
a nice
man.
online job, we're planning to go up to the Pacific Northwest. We're going to be summering there. So
Awesome. Yeah, we
I
get
will.
super lonely out here. We got to go to, every time we want to see our friends, we got to go to San Francisco or Europe or something. So
Well, we'll
we
be
love having
camping out
visitors.
at some national park nearby, but we'll make our way over there. And
Okay. We'll
That'd be
take you
really
to the
cool.
for
river.
sure.
We have the world's greatest rivers.
We do. We have wilderness like you've never seen.
I've always wanted to visit there. And it may just be because as a little kid, I was huge into cryptozoology. So I know that is Bigfoot territory.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
We
just,
definitely have a corner here that it has 100% Bigfoot living in it. Like, if there is
well, my
Bigfoot,
mom spent some of her childhood. She was from Alaska originally, but she spent some of her childhood in inland Washington State, and they had Sasquatch up there. They believe
these
it.
we got these black bears, and they walk around on 2 feet, and they really do look like Bigfoot. I've seen some pictures.
Oh,
of these
there you go.
things. We
Oh my
saw a
gosh.
bunch of brown or black bear prints and droppings the other day.
we did not see any black bears walking around
we
on
just saw
hind
no
legs.
Bigfoots, but I've seen these pictures of them. They walk around on 2 legs. It's kind of nuts. So I
Yeah.
wonder-
I think that there's something weirder and darker in these woods. I have such weird vibes.
we got stuff to show you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take you out
Well,
there.
there's I've read about stuff up in the Pacific North. You got the pale crawlers. That's another one.
I have not heard
Good
about
Lord.
that one, but I am not surprised. There's something in these woods that it's like they're very, very beautiful, but they're also some of the spookiest woods that
Mhm.
I've spent time in. Like,
Yeah.
you go to the woods in California and it's just, it's so pretty and mountains and how nice and there's people everywhere. And here you go in the woods and you're like, man, this is.
It's kind of like Transylvania or something. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very
There's
spooky.
also so many layers.
Yeah.
We'll get into
let's
it.
let
Come
him go for
visit.
now.
That would be
It's
fantastic.
got a
Come visit. But
small
yeah.
child in the next room. They should let you get off the phone.
Yeah, but I would say that's my whole deal. Is concluding statement: physiognomy is real. You got 4 temperaments, facial features, all that stuff. You can judge a book by its cover. The personality, the soul, it's shown, expressed in the body because the two are interconnected through genes, maybe through a more spiritual thing, at the very least through genetics, hormones, all that stuff. That is important. You should love yourself, love your body, your face, because it is the record of everything that you are, and your destiny, your nature, all that is tied in and expressed in your physical features. And that's a good thing. That's nothing to be ashamed of. That means that every feature of yours, whether you love it or hate it, it's meaningful and it's part of you. And I don't think anyone should be ashamed of how they look. And I think it's a dreadful thing that our culture encourages that so much. And I think that it's an important thing, should not be neglected. And it does have a broader, deeper social application. It's not just, oh, it's a neat party trick. Oh, I can use this to, meet a girl, start a business. That's good and that helps. But I really do think that there is a broader importance. And I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think so.
I think that all things do start with knowing yourself, at least the road to success. You have to know what you're working with. So that's easy to get behind. But
Absolutely.
yeah, Taylor, thank you so much for coming by today. Let's
Hey,
let's not make this our last interaction.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I think it was a great discussion, personally. I think you guys are great. Very fun people, smart people too. And good questions, good big picture stuff. I've had pretty much all my interviews so far have been pretty good, but this is definitely the best. And it helps because you guys have a nice studio, so it feels very professional. I love the plants.
Aw,
Thank you
thanks,
so
man.
much, Ben.
Yeah.
The appearance is important, like I was saying. So
You gotta cultivate
We
it.
take it very seriously.
the
Yes.
visuals.
It's
Yeah.
been through many iterations.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's a hard one process. But
Yeah.
thank you so much, Taylor. It
All
was
right, Taylor.
really, it
Thank
was
you.
fantastic.
God bless. Have a good one.
Have a good rest of
Bye-bye.
your day.
Bye, man.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.